council in late 2018 in September, October, and December. And the purpose of tonight is basically to get specific guidance on what staff is proposing as phase 1 options to enable us to move forward with some code drafting that we could have complete by the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, and to also get some preliminary feedback on what we're tabulating as phase 2 options. We'll also talk about a little bit we'll touch on the project background, go into some of the community engagement and feedback that we've heard the last few months since we commenced the community engagement in February. And then we'll talk about the specific land use code options with some questions posed for council. So the questions that we have real quick are, does council agree with the approach to phase 1 to include options A, B, and D to be completed by the fall of this year? And should RMX1 continue to, should it be excluded from further consideration from the project? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then secondarily, what is City Council's feedback on the proposed phase 2, which includes options B, E, and F, which we'll go into detail on through the presentation. The third question is, should a statistically valid survey be conducted based on whatever options council advises to move forward? So real quick, we have 2 phases that we're going to talk about tonight. I'll talk about it here really high level, and then we'll get into the details later in the presentation. But basically, phase 1, we're looking at the option of potentially doing some sort of square footage cap on single family homes and or allowing additional square footage above that cap to be used in the form of accessory dwelling units. And a third option that we have posed is enabling single-family homes in certain residential zones to be converted to duplexes or triplexes. The phase 2 options, real quick, generally involve more of a subdivision solution where we're looking at a higher number of units, potentially more smaller units. Again, making clear that none of these options would have more floor area than is currently permitted on these lots. We're also going to talk about the possibility of new duplex or triplex units in these zones. So again, we'll go into more detail on those options. So as we get into the background, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to walk you through that and the community outreach portion.
Thanks, Carl, and good evening, Council. So just briefly here, we have some background on the project as a refresher. So the project was a work plan priority item for planning in 2018. In the fall of this past year, in December, the Council worked to establish the project scope, goals, and purpose. And then in February of this year through early May, we have conducted the primary community engagement phase. The council stated project purpose has been to require more smaller homes in residential zones that are consistent with the character of the existing neighborhoods and that advance the city's energy efficiency, climate sustainability, and housing affordability goals and policies. This is the full project why statement shown here on the screen. I'll just read it quickly. The city's residential neighborhoods are experiencing a dramatic demographic and economic shift with the replacement of modest, more affordable homes with larger, more expensive homes. These large homes are often inconsistent with the existing character of the neighborhoods and are an inefficient use of land that has exacerbated the city's housing jobs imbalance and the high cost of housing. In addition, the large homes do not align with the city's energy conservation goals and policies as they consume greater amounts of energy, both in operation and construction, than more modest-sized homes. Again, these are the purpose and why statements as established by Council in December at the December study session. The purpose statement then is consistent with the BVCP. Staff will amend the land use code to require smaller homes in residential zones consistent with the character of the existing neighborhoods. This includes creative solutions for both the preservation of existing homes and the development of more small homes rather than fewer large houses in these zones. The guiding comprehensive plan policies include Section 2, built environment, including preservation and support for residential neighborhoods, accessory units, mix of complementary land uses, sensitive infill and redevelopment, as well as Section 4, energy, climate, and waste, policies such as energy efficient land use and building design. Also, Section 7, housing. Policy 7.06, mixture of housing types, actually speaks specifically to this project, as well as other policies such as preserving housing stock, housing for a full range of households, permanently affordable housing for additional intensity, and market affordability. The project scope, as established by council, has been primarily focused on the RR and RE zones, residential, rural, residential estate, as well as we've kept in the scope the RL zones and RMX1. The brightly colored yellow on the map is the RL1 zoning districts, and this map here shows the RR and RE zones a little bit more clearly. There are about 2,000 lots combined in the RE and RR zones. RL1 has approximately 11,000 lots by itself, to give you an idea of the scope and scale. And again, RE and RR are the largest minimum lot size areas we have in our zoning districts, so 15,000 and 30,000 square feet respectively.
Can I stop you there? This is probably more an education question for me. When it says RE requires a minimum lot area of 15,000 feet, does that mean that if a new RE lot were to be created, it must have 15,000 feet?
Yes.
Because 60% of our RE lots right now are less than 15,000 feet.
Yeah, they would be non-conforming, non-standard.
So when in, like, in history did that minimum come in? Like, I'm trying to get my head around with, like, how we say there's a minimum, yet 60% of the things don't meet the minimum. Was that like a minimum that came in after something was already designated as RE? And they're grandfathered, or?
So in the 1960s, there was a zoning that required only 10,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. A lot of neighborhoods were built with that standard. In 1971, there was a comprehensive rezoning of the city, and that's where the RE zoning was established, and they broke it out between 7,000 and 15,000. And those old, I can't, it was SR something, but those old 10,000 square foot ones, as I guess as a matter of policy, were put into the ER bucket of zoning. So it was a decision that was made in the early 70s.
Okay, and so those, presumably those roughly 900 of the 1,500 RE lots that are below 15,000 feet, they're kind of like grandfathered, they existed before 71 and?
That's correct, that's correct. And we have non-standard zoning regulations that kind of guide how development on that size of lot would occur.
So, because we have a lot of REs that are like 6,000 to 7,000 feet, right? Which the FARs would then limit those house sizes to, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 feet, or whatever the math comes out on that. Is that right? Okay.
And so I have a follow-up question. When did FARs come into the picture?
I'll let Carl answer that because it's been in the recent past, but I don't remember the exact dates.
So the RL1 zone, more than 15 years ago and further back, had a 0.8 FAR, and so we were seeing a lot of very, very large homes being built in the RL1 zone, and that, I think, prompted the compatible infill development project based on the concerns of the size of those homes. So when the compatible infill development project was initiated and then completed, it lowered that FAR in RL1 and also addressed properties outside of PUDs and site reviews in RL2. And then it also applied FAR onto the RR and RE zones, which did not have floor area caps or limitations before that time.
So before that time, you could have built lot line to lot line house
Well, I mean,
size?
you had to fit within
With
the
the
setbacks, yeah, and the height limit.
So that was the limiting factor, the setbacks?
That's right.
Okay.
And can I just follow up? Were setbacks changed at that point in time?
I don't believe they were, no.
So each zone has a different like setback? And so like the REs, when you mentioned that they came into effect sometime maybe in the early 70s, it's 25, 25, and then a combination of 25 for sides. But that would be very different if you had a 7,000 square foot lot?
That's right. Yeah, so RL1, for instance, has a combined setback of 15, yeah, but it's like minimum 5.
Yeah. So were those setbacks introduced at that point in time?
That's
Because I'm trying to
correct.
figure out when the setbacks.
Sure. So prior to 1971, in a lot of the lower density residential zoning districts, the side yard setback was just 5 feet. And when they did the 71 rezoning, they changed that to it has to be a minimum of 5 feet, but a total of both sides for 15.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
One thing I'll also point out too that's of interest is that when you have a non-standard lot, so a lot that's smaller than the minimum lot size, the non-conforming regulations actually require the height of the building to come down incrementally based on its size. So some houses have to not go over 25 feet, for instance, if the lot is small enough.
Okay, so the council's broad goals for the project in December of 2018 were to study and consider the following elements. So creative solutions to potentially allow infill redevelopment of large lots into 2 or more houses or units. Where appropriate, they are more affordable and designed in such a way as to be sensitive to the neighborhood context. To study and consider a potential hard cap on floor area for single-family development, as well as incentives and disincentives for preserving existing housing stock and creative infill solutions that are affordable, and also looking at potential strategies and phasing for adjusting the land use code standards to form in bulk, as well as updates to the energy conservation code moving forward. So moving on to the community engagement we've done so far this year. There's a list on the screen of some of the outreach efforts and channels we've utilized, including some direct mailings, online, next door posts and tweets, as well as our online project web pages and utility bill mailers to get the word out about the open houses and the project and the questionnaire in general. So beginning in February of this year, we conducted a series of 3 open houses that included engagement events, exercises, background materials, and presentations. This was coupled with our other code amendment projects, the use table project and the community benefit project. We also had the online, the city's engagement platform, beheardboulder.org, with the engagement questionnaire. Over 380 respondents. We went to the What's Up Boulder event in April, and then had some neighborhood office hours also in March and April across the city. And then we conducted 2 stakeholder group meetings, which served as kind of listening sessions, more of a focus group format. And then the 4th open house in early May, a couple weeks ago, in North Boulder, we sent out direct mailings to all the properties zoned RE and RR, and we had over 100 attendees at that meeting. And we'll touch on these with some results coming up here. So at the February open house meetings, we had a series of boards with some questions and prompts and some graphics, and we asked the participants to dot vote on some questions of what they liked or didn't like. And so basically kind of what we heard at a high level was some split sentiments, but a majority of the participants were not in support of further restricting FAR or a cap on single family home size. There was a slight majority at these February open houses in favor of encouraging more smaller homes instead of one large home on these large lots. Again, a slight majority was not in favor of allowing tiny homes in the residential zones. And the question of allowing in the RE and RR zones some more housing types, such as subdivisions of lots into less than 30,000 square feet, or duplexes, cottages, tiny houses. A slight majority was in favor of allowing some of those options in those zones. So fast forwarding to the most recent open house in North Boulder, we presented some more scenario options and graphics that Carl's going to touch on coming up, and that was in your council memo in the packet. So these depicted some scenarios for a cap on home size or allowing an additional accessory unit, duplexes, triplexes, pocket neighborhoods. And we asked the public to simply tell us with sticky notes, what they liked, what they didn't like, and other comments. So in general, some of the themes we heard of what the public liked at the May meeting was they liked the idea of having smaller homes. Some thought they were too big today. They liked the flexibility of allowing more ADUs and more variety of housing choices. Some felt that more density created more walkability, and it provided more choices for young adults or aging in place. What we heard from people who didn't like the options was that they were felt that could hurt property values. They were concerned about impacts to neighborhoods and infrastructure of neighborhoods, changing the character, and they felt that the density was not wanted in their neighborhoods. Other comments we heard was that some felt that a cap on home size should be tied to allowing more flexibility for additional units. Others felt that this will change the character of their neighborhood. Some felt that the RL1 zone should not be part of the scope of the project. Again, some felt that more housing choice was appropriate for a variety of people. And others felt that the proposed options would not necessarily improve housing affordability or energy efficiency on their own. So the Be Heard Boulder online questionnaire was another piece of the engagement that was open since March and then closed in early May after the open house in North Boulder. So to be clear, this is not a statistically valid survey, and it's not intended to be. It's city's online engagement platform to help us gauge the city's or the community's opinions on potential options and to try and find any kind of common themes throughout the project. And it's intended to complement the in-person engagement events. So with that context, we did have over 380 questionnaire respondents who self-reported their location. About 40% were from North Boulder, a quarter in Central Boulder, and another quarter in South Boulder, 10% from East Boulder. So we'll go through these series of 7 questions. Again, the exact percentages may not mean too much, but the overall trends and themes are kind of what we're trying to highlight. So the first question was, what is your opinion of new construction single-family home size in Boulder, in particular North Boulder? About a third of the respondents felt they were the right size. Just over a third felt they were too large. The second question asked, should house size be further restricted in the city to further the project's goals? Just over half of the respondents said no. Some split sentiments on these questions. Kind of echoed what we heard at the open houses as well. We asked whether there should be a maximum square footage cap. Again, just over 50% said no. We followed up with the people who said yes on this question and asked them if there should be a cap, what should that square footage be in 1,000 square foot increments? The majority of respondents were between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet, with 4,000 square feet receiving the most responses. Similarly, when we asked what should the FAR be lowered from today's regulations, a large majority said no. When we asked, should we encourage more smaller homes on one lot versus one large home, there were about mixed split sentiments. Half of the respondents said yes. When we asked, should we allow a diversity of housing types on the RR and RE zones, a majority of the respondents did say yes. And finally, we asked about tiny homes, as should they be allowed as an alternative housing type in the residential zones, and there were, again, mixed sentiments on that question, with half saying yes. Finally, as part of the community engagement, we did hold 2 stakeholder group meetings. These were 9 people consisting of varied interests. We had 1 participant from Plan Boulder, 1 from the Boulder Chamber, 2 local architects, and then 5 participants from the local neighborhoods who indicated early on this fall they were interested in the project on both sides of the spectrum. And again, the goal of this was not to necessarily reach a consensus on anything, but simply be a listening session for us to hear diversity of thoughts and find some common themes or common concerns. So what we heard out of these meetings from those who were generally opposed to the concepts was that they felt more data and economic impacts were needed. There were concerns about impacts to infrastructure of additional density. They felt that the character of the neighborhoods could be changed in a non-positive way. They didn't want the neighborhoods to be punished. They were concerned about property values, and that they felt any changes should be strategic as well, and that, again, that new large homes would be required already to be energy efficient. Some of the general comments and themes of those in support of the concepts were that they felt the city should provide more opportunities for housing diversity and choice in these neighborhoods, including ADUs and cottages and duplexes. Some felt that the property values would only be increased and that the infrastructure will likely be able to handle the development over time. It wouldn't be, a rush to redevelop all these properties at once. And then there were concerns that some of these neighborhoods either had real or perceived discrimination against different socioeconomic cohorts. And they also stated that these character was already changing in these neighborhoods with large homes, and that more smaller homes fits better with the overall city's vision for mixed housing. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the what we've been hearing from the community the past few months. So with that, I'll hand it back to Carl to go over some of the land use options.
So last we talked to council about this in December, we had set up the timeline and that specified the first part of 2019 where we would focus on community engagement as well as the formulation of options. So that's what we've done over the last few months. So you can see here we have 6 different options that we're going to talk about that council requested be broken into 2 phases, one that could potentially be implemented by the fall of this year, and then one that would go on later. So I'm going to talk about each of these different options. The options are basically based on the goals that we talked about for this project, as well as taking the initial suggestions of City Council into account. Poplar Place has been brought up as kind of like a model to look at, and so the visuals we thought would be helpful so that you could see kind of the range of different development ranging from one single family house and breaking that square footage down into multiple units on a similar sized lot. So we wanted to show that. We did take some assumptions into account. RL1 has a 6 dwelling units per acre maximum, so we didn't want to do any options that would exceed that amount. We wanted to show the different options on a characteristic lot. So we had chosen a 23,000 square foot lot, which is typical of the RE and the RR zones. But we also included an attachment that shows a conforming RE lot at 15,000 and a conforming RR lot at 30,000 square feet. We also assumed a cap in this case of 3,500 square feet. This is just a visual, it is adjustable, but it's basically based on the maximum size of a house you can get on a conforming RL1 lot today, based on the FAR, which is like around a 0.5 FAR. So this slide basically shows, again, the evolution from single family to like a cottage court design where you have subdivision, and I'll go through each of those.
Can I pause right there? I want to go back to something you said on A. So the 3,500 came from, so we have these RE and RR lots that are, some of which are below the 15,000 minimum, but some of them are above, right? And so we're basically saying, what we'd be saying on this cap is, regardless of the size of your lot and regardless of the character of your neighborhood, you can't have a house that's bigger than what's allowed in the RL zone, which is different neighborhoods. Is that right?
It's just as a starting point, because I think what we're thinking is that, beyond a 7,000 square foot lot, that's where you start getting into large lot territory, and that maybe it could be applied similarly across the zones. The RL1 zone, RE, and the RR zones already have the same sliding scale FAR today. So if you go above a 7,000 square foot lot, that extra square footage could be used in different ways. I think that's the way we looked at it.
So put it another way, in this example, you're assuming a lot size. And if it was a much larger lot, would the cap be larger too in your proposal?
It could be. I mean, that's what we're gonna, it could be a hard cap, or it could be incremental based on lot size. So that's some of the different options that we've outlined in option A.
And is there any, I guess there's not, any variability for what the neighborhood is currently bearing? In other words, some neighborhoods have larger houses, some RE neighborhoods have larger houses than other RE neighborhoods. And so there's no consideration of what types of houses already exist within the proximity of the target house.
I mean, in this case, it's based on lot size, just varying lot sizes.
So Bob's question actually prompts a follow-up for me, which is, have we looked at the problem of the large houses contextually. So that is to say, a large house along Gapter Road, for example, may not stand out the way a large house in North Boulder does. Have we taken a look at those differences contextually?
We've driven around the city and looked at the different neighborhoods. There are certainly, certain differences between the context of the different neighborhoods. So there were certain things related to neighborhood character and massing, that we talked about, like where it might be more of an issue in one part of the city versus another. But then when looking at the other components of the goals, like the energy efficiency piece or the affordability piece, that's a citywide issue.
Okay, Lisa.
And wasn't there somewhere in the memo you guys talked about 3,500 for LR and
RL.
for RE, it was like 41 something close
Right,
to
yeah,
that,
we have
and then
3 different options for
sliding
a cap, so
RR.
it could potentially be like if you go up to a larger lot size, that cap might be larger.
Right, but this diagram, everything is the same here. So each lot is 22,000.
And again, this is illustrative,
It starts with a 3,500 square foot house, one, and then it's broken up. And if you added each one of those structures on each lot, it would add up to 3,500, is that correct? Or
No, I
guess
mean-
not with the cottage.
Well, I can go through each of the options, and then feel free to jump in.
I'll stop.
So I think just as a starting point, if you look on the lower right, that shows a 23,000 square foot lot. Under today's regulations, you can build almost a 6,000 square foot home. So it's 5,750 square feet, and that's what that's showing. So I'm going to just talk about the phase 1 options, and we were thinking that we could stop at the end of this and talk about that and then move on to phase 2, but we're certainly flexible. So these are the 3 phase 1 options that we're proposing. So option A talks about a cap. B looks at the ability to allow an existing single-family home to be broken up into duplex or triplex units. And then D looks at going beyond the cap and using that extra square footage for accessory dwelling units. So I'll go into each of these right now. So this is option A. So this is just if the city were to apply a cap. And in this case, for instance, we have 3,500 as an example. Option A1 shows 3,500 square feet as a cap. So that's based on a 7,000 square foot lot. Option A2 is if you took a 10,000 square foot lot, you could get up to 4,100 square feet. So that's an option that could be applied, across all lots, or it could jump up with a larger lot size. And the same for a 15,000 square foot lot, it could be 4,710.
Do you have the side-by-side comparisons to what the FARs allow on those lot sizes? In other words, what does the FAR allowance today on a 7,000 square foot lot?
I mean, it equates to about a 0.5 FAR, but it's sliding scale, so it goes
So about
up
7,000 feet.
Yeah.
So a 7,000 foot lot is roughly allows a 3,500 square foot. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that would be no change. There's effectively already a cap because of the FAR, right? On option
Yeah,
1.
but I mean, again, it could be applied to RR and RE for larger lots. It could be capped at, your primary single-family residence could be capped at a certain size. That's what
I'm just
we're
trying to get a
suggesting.
sense for how much these proposed caps are below the current FAR allotment. So it sounds like on A1, the answer is it's not. It's the same as what the FAR would allow.
I think the way we looked at it is like
The delta.
when you get above 7,000 square feet,
So
that's
let's
where
go-
you're starting to get
So let's go
into.
there. So what would a 10,000 square foot lot in RE, what does the currently FAR allow?
Isn't it 4,100?
4,100.
Okay, so Bob, what they're doing is proposing caps that are related to existing FAR.
I
We could
see.
choose to apply them across all size lots.
Okay, so what you're saying is this is what the FAR allows, not proposed caps.
I think where this is different than the current regs is that if you had a lot that goes above 10,000 square feet, under today's regs, that 4,100 would continue to grow. In this scenario, it would be capped at that 10,000 square foot benchmark.
So he's giving you options. We could apply them such they apply to all lot sizes.
There are options, and they also would limit anything between a 10,000 square foot lot and a 15,000 square foot lot would be limited to the lower end of that range.
So we're taking away the sliding scale.
Yeah, taking away the sliding scale. So it's capping it at the low end of the range for each of those, I believe.
So this is to provoke a conversation about what caps we might want to look like if we decide to do a cap. But, yeah.
And I think when we get to option D, it might make a little bit more sense of why we're suggesting this. So option B is getting at the goal of trying to preserve or, avoid demolition of existing single-family homes by enabling the possibility of converting them to duplexes and triplexes. So again, emphasizing that this is conversion, this is conversion in this phase 1 scenario.
So Carl, I have a question about this. There are many of these in RMX zones. And were those allowed? I mean, I don't know if they were grandfathered in because they looked like they were converted. I'm thinking in an area of like Pine Street and 17th. In that area, there's a whole lot of homes that have obviously had this done to them. Mm-hmm. And so was that allowed previous to the RMX1 zoning, or is it allowed under RMX1 zoning?
I believe it was allowed previous to RMX zoning. David can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there were high-density residential zones around the downtown. It was called HRX back in the day, so it allowed high density, and then it was effectively downzoned in a way, where the minimum lot size was adjusted and the density was capped, but you were allowed to maintain the density that's in that zone. HRE.
Oh, are you done?
Well, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I just wanted to understand, can this be done in any zone district right now? Just out of curiosity, can you take an existing dwelling unit and demise it into multiple dwelling units?
Not in the RRRE or RL1. In RL2, if you have enough open space, you could.
And in RMX?
You can. Attached units are permitted as long as you have the lot area. The problem is a lot of those properties don't have the lot area. A lot of them are non-conforming now.
Right, and I mean, I've walked with Crystal Gray and heard some of the history of how those changes happened in response to the way development was being implemented. But so there are a few zone districts in town where this is currently permitted.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, Carl, a question here. Your language says allow floor area up to 5,750 square feet if it's broken up. But allow isn't probably what you mean, right? Because it's conversion. So this would only be, you would allow an existing building to be broken up.
Well, I mean, I think, again, to incentivize it, perhaps they could build up to the current FAR maximum if they're converting to other units.
So you would contemplate a potential allowed expansion, possibly, if it were.
Yeah, I think that would fit under this.
To put a point on that, so if somebody has, let's say now, a 4,000 square foot house, and they want to convert that into triplex, they could add another 1,700 square feet onto that existing house, or would that be a phase 2 type?
I think we were thinking that could fit under this option. Again, incentivizing, preservation of the existing unit.
How much of this has actually happened in real life over the last, 10 or 15 years? Since it's prohibited in some zones, and you mentioned that the zones that's permitted in, oftentimes it can't be done because of lot size and FAR. I mean, does this happen like 10 times a year, 100 times a year?
It's not that prevalent. We don't, if we saw 5 of them a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we do have some large lots that have new houses on them and that have duplexes built on those. So those have happened recently. Oh.
So, okay, on the Hill, a bunch of things were converted back in the day, right?
Yeah.
You are making a big distinction about, I'm changing subjects, converting versus building a new triplex. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of these other options in phase one? Does it involve new construction?
Yeah, I mean, it's encouraging the adaptive reuse of existing units in these neighborhoods. I think we also, at least when you have an existing unit there, it already looks like a single-family home. So that's already a feather in the cap. Whereas I think if we're talking about new construction, I think we then have to be more sensitive about the design and making sure that it does appear like a single-family home. And that's why we've put that in the phase 2 category.
Yep.
So just expanding on the cap idea and incentivizing different types of units, option D basically takes the premise of you cap the primary structure, in this case 3,500 square feet, it could be a different number, but you could allow up to the current maximum FAR if you use that floor area over the cap in different ways. So in this case, we're suggesting accessory dwelling units. So this example shows a house capped at 3,500 square feet, but the additional square footage up to the 5,750 is used as accessory dwelling units. So we felt that that could create an incentive for those types of units. One thing we wanted to point out, though, is in doing this, obviously there's no subdivision involved in this. ADUs are looked at a little bit differently than traditional dwelling units. If you get into the larger, lot sizes out there and you use this premise, there could be quite a few ADUs, 7 or more. So it'd be something we want to hear from the council about that, potentially we need to cap the number of ADUs if we were to move forward with this. And again, getting back to that graduated cap idea, if you have different caps for different sizes, that would impact how many ADUs would be possible on the larger lots as well.
I'll ask a couple questions here. So one is, are there access standards for ADUs, like car access, or if you have a larger lot and you put an accessory dwelling unit off in a corner, are there any rules about, do you have to have a driveway or a walkway or?
No, there's no standards of that nature. You do have to have a parking space for that unit on the property.
Yeah, so it's just a parking requirement. And then in terms of rentals, I think, do we allow more than one rental license on a parcel?
Yeah, we're gonna have to check that.
Okay, maybe get
I mean, today, obviously, we're emphasizing that under today's standards, you can only have one ADU per lot. So this change would be allowing more than one ADU per lot.
Oh, understood. Yeah. So currently, it wouldn't necessarily come up. But if we were to contemplate something where somebody could have 2 backyard ADUs, would they be allowed to rent out both of them? I guess that's the question, really.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
Thank you.
So this is just a summary of staff's recommendation for phase 1. So we're recommending as part of phase 1 that it include options A, 1, 2, or 3. Option B1 means allowing the conversion of the existing single family, and option D means ADUs. We're recommending that it apply to the RR and RE zones. There's not a lot of ADUs in those zones today, and they have more land to accommodate parking and potentially accessory units with less impact on neighbors. So those zones are included. RL1 would stay the same, and that there'd be saturation requirements, the 20%. We're not recommending that RMX1 be included at this time just because it has a different nature associated with it in being around the downtown where you expect more intensity. It already has a different FAR calculation. There's not a high number of RMX1 lots. A lot of the lot sizes tend to float around 6,000 square feet. But this slide is to basically give the council an idea of what would happen if the different caps were instituted and how many lots in each of these zones would become non-conforming. So we included that in the memo for your review. Table 5 shows an example of if we allowed square footage above a cap to be used for ADUs, how many potentially ADUs could you get on different size lots? So on a conforming 7,000 square foot lot, like a typical RL1 lot, you'd only have one potential. When you get up to 10,000 or 15,000, you could have up to 2 ADUs per lot. And then when you get up in the range of 30,000, you could potentially have 7, which we've shown. So again, might need to talk about kind of capping that. And then in the gray, we have the cottage units, which we're talking about like a restricted size cottage units. This would be like more of a phase 2 option. So we look at restricted size cottages as like double the size of an ADU, a detached ADU. So could be up to like 1,500 square feet. So this gives you an example of how many of those you could get based on this idea.
And this
So-
is all predicated on a 3,500-foot cap?
Correct. So
have some questions.
we thought we could have a discussion about these phase 1 options unless the council wanted us to move forward with the,
Questions first.
okay.
Yep.
You go back to the table. Table 4. I just want to make sure I understand table 4. So let's just take RR1, go all the way over to 4,700 square feet. Is this the percentage of houses, 25% of the houses in RR1 would be non-conforming? That is that they're already more, 25% of the houses in RR1 are already above 4,700 feet?
Where's the 20?
Okay,
Oh,
table 4, RR1, second row, all the way to the right, 4,710 square foot maximum.
Right.
And the heading is percentage of lots that would become non-conforming. I'm trying to understand, is it percentage of houses that would be non-conforming or lots? How does a lot non-conforming?
Well, it'd be houses, the percentage of,
So you went out and counted, and if the cap was 4,710, there's 33 houses on RR1 that are already more than 4,700 feet. Is that what you're saying?
that's right.
Okay, okay. Did you do the other math of how many houses on each of these RE and RR zones are currently, I guess I could do the math here with you, less than 3,500 square feet? So would it be fair to say that 53% of the houses in RR1 are currently less than 3,500 feet? I'm just trying to get an idea of like what's the potential for scrapes, right? Because that's the problem that's been proposed by some people, is that small houses are getting scraped and replaced by big houses. I'm trying to understand how many small houses there still are on these lots.
You had a table in our memo where you looked at amount of demolition and the size of those houses that were demolished and then what replaced them. And the delta is like 4,000 to 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, I saw that. My question is a little different, which is how many small houses are left? And we have to define what small is.
Well, I think, Bob, it occurs to me that you've answered your question in a way. If you define 3,500 as small in the left column, then it's the balance.
So 53% of the houses in RR1 are currently smaller than 3,500 square feet. Is that right?
Yeah, that'd be correct.
Right. Did you take that down then to different sizes, 2,500 or 1,500 or 2,000? You kind of stopped at 3,500?
Yeah, we have the raw data pulled down from GIS. We haven't
Okay.
done the calculations for this other smaller, just the figures here in the table.
Okay.
Okay, so we have Mary and Lisa. I don't know who was first.
Don't care. I have a different question. So I was wondering, you talked about the ADU saturation in RL1, and that right now is 20%. But in RR and RE, there's 0% saturation. I'm just curious if you were able to figure out what percent of the RLs and, REs and RRs have ADUs or OAUs in them? And if not, we can figure that out later, but.
Yeah, we did get some data even after communicating about the numbers. We don't have a percentage, but obviously smaller numbers than we see in RL1. So RE right now looks like we have 29 ADUs in that zone. 2 are considered pending at this point. RR1, there's 2. In RR2, there's 6.
So what are those numbers? 29, 6, and 2? 2 and 6? So 37 or
2%.
30,
It'd be about 2% for each.
yeah. So it's not like people are jumping out of windows to come and get a ADU or OAU if they have a RR or RE, right?
Those percentages compared to other zoning districts. In other words, what, if you say about 2% of the lots in R and RE have gone to ADUs, what percentage in the other zoning districts? Is it higher than 2%? You've got a lot more.
Yeah, I don't think we have that percentage.
Okay.
Okay.
So my question is on this slide as well, with the apply to RRRE or RL1. Has there been any consideration given to applying it by subcommunity, since we have subcommunity planning going on? Was there any consideration to doing that? Why or why not?
I mean, I think we've thought about it. It's just if there is initiative to try to, complete this project this year, obviously subcommunity plans can drag on for a number of years. That's certainly an option.
And so some of these changes would have to be done within the context of existing subcommunity plans, is that correct?
It could be, yeah.
So I guess what I'm asking, to do some of this, would it require amending the subcommunity, North Boulder subcommunity plan specifically?
I don't believe that the phase 1 options here would require that. I think when we get into phase 2, that's where we have concerns about, consistency with subcommunity plans and the comp plan.
I'll just make a comment here since you brought it up. I think that's a really good reason not to do RL1 right now, because RL1 is found across every subcommunity. Some of these zone districts are much more concentrated in particular areas, and indeed, some of them are in, I think, the area that we might be doing the East Boulder subcommunity plan. So that would be an opportunity to talk about how any changes were perceived and how phase 2 might be perceived in that subcommunity. So I would like to see RL1 held back on even phase 1 changes until we get a chance to do subcommunity planning. But I think RE and RR are worth talking about now.
Okay, in terms of process, we could pause and give our opinions on phase 1. That's what we were thinking. And then have a presentation on phase 2, which gets into subdividing, which is more something that we'd give direction to staff on, knowing that the next council would be dealing with that. So do we want to pause and give our opinions on this? Okay. Open floor.
So I've been thinking about how we got to here and how this started. And it started with folks that live up in North Boulder that were basically being assaulted by demolitions and the large houses that were replacing them. And then I got to thinking, looking at the map of where all the RRs and REs are, that perhaps if something like what is going on in North Boulder were happening out in, say, on Gapter Road, nobody would complain because what is going up is comparable to what's already there. So, which is why I was asking about the subcommunities, and I actually would like to see more information, and I don't know that we can have it by phase 1, but it seems to me that the problem originated in North Boulder, and we really haven't heard from other areas of town that are having this issue. And it may be because the houses are already big there. I don't know. But that's why I'm thinking that the RR and RE be included, but only in the North Boulder subcommunity. and we'll be talking later about the survey, I think it would affect then who we would survey. And just taking advantage of the fact that there is a subcommunity there, and it's got a plan, and it's got a pretty defined area, and a population that could be surveyed, and so there's some advantages there. And as Sam said, we're going to be doing the East Boulder plan, and then this conversation can be rolled into that discussion. But when you look at the map, the vast majority of those lots are in the North Boulder subcommunity. So that's my comment. And I want to hear the discussion on caps versus no caps and ADUs, but it seems to me that the other piece of information that, and please tell me if I'm wrong, do we know of the ones that have been demolished, how many are speculative or done by developers, and how many are private people doing this? Because it seems to me that the options that were being presented here in phase one might be more appealing to a speculative demolition than it would be to a private person that bought it and demolishes it and builds their own house.
So can I just throw out there, for sake of discussion, that it seems to me that thinking about our purpose for this project is important, and so I think it's good to pause. And I think every time we build a big house, instead of smaller units, we are constricting our future choices. And so to me, I guess I'm more interested in exploring broader implications than just a certain place in town. And I know this gets into the whole issue of growth, and I know that's a sticky wicket, and maybe all of us wish that Colorado's population wasn't booming and the world wasn't being overpopulated, but be that as it may, it seems to me that every time, that one of the things I'd like to do is to be setting rules for the future that are taking into account that context, that we want more smaller houses rather than fewer large houses. And I think that is a choice that may not be popular everywhere in town, but is also kind of the reality of the age we live in. If we're going to address affordability and having a diverse population. So I guess I'll just throw that out there for our discussion, that I think applying some of these rules more broadly, and I think we have to do it at a rate of change that's acceptable, but I still think that's where we need to head as a city, with kind of every neighborhood putting a little skin in the game. So I'm just going to throw that out there as where I'm kind of coming to this issue from, to spur conversation. I don't know who's next. Bob, and then Aaron.
So let me react to things that both Mary and Zan said. First of all, I agree with Mary that context matters, and even taking Mary's observation about North Boulder and taking it even more granular, we have different neighborhoods in North Boulder. So for example, Carolyn Heights, which is near my neighborhood to the east of 19th Street, has lots of really big houses in it. And so when somebody builds a big house, it's not out of context in that neighborhood. People in that neighborhood don't complain about big houses because most of the houses in that neighborhood are already big. And a cap in that neighborhood would be absolutely artificial, arbitrary, capricious, and out of context with that neighborhood. And so I guess I'm building on what Mary says. Not only is most of the concern and most of the large house building happening in North Boulder, the concern I think is in some neighborhoods in North Boulder and not in other neighborhoods in North Boulder. So I think it's even more granular. With respect to your comment, Zan, about wouldn't it be great if we had more small houses, the answer is, yeah, it would be great, and I think we do a lot of things to develop that. But if we impose an arbitrary cap of, say, 3,500 square feet, and we force someone who otherwise could have built a 7,000 square foot house, and effectively through this cap, we force them to build two 3,500 square foot houses, those two 3,500 square foot houses are still $2 million each. So we may have made it attainable for a pretty rich person, but we haven't made it attainable for the middle income or the moderate income person. So I'm not sure that this is a good tool of affordability. This may be a good tool to stop people from building large houses if that's our number one objective. I think we have higher priorities than that in front of us right now. But I don't think this is going to create affordability. This project's not going to create affordability. We have interesting discussion around ADUs, and maybe that's where we should take this. But I don't think putting an arbitrary cap is going to, certainly not at 3,500 feet, is going to create affordability for our community. I think we have to tackle it in different ways.
But I guess, can I encourage you to say, so the kinds of things that you would support are the ADU? Go ahead and say what you do support.
Well, I don't support a cap. I certainly don't support a cap at any level. For the reasons that have been stated, maybe will continue to be stated this evening. I think we could have an interesting discussion around relaxing our recently enacted ADU rules. I'm a little reluctant even to go there because those rules were just enacted within the past year, and we haven't really had a chance to test those yet either. But if we were forced to do one thing, among all the things that I've seen up there, the one thing that I guess I'd be reluctantly willing to explore is relaxing the ADU rules. I certainly wouldn't put 7 ADUs on a lot. I'm from Nebraska. There's towns that don't have that many people in them. So, but there may be certain places where 2 ADUs will do, and we have to deal with parking and access, as Aaron started to talk about. Or we could talk about larger ADUs, instead of 800 feet, maybe it goes up to a larger number. I think that would be a fine exercise for staff and the community to engage in. But I wouldn't do any of these things. It's a short answer to your question, Zan. Okay. But if I was forced to do one, I would probably explore the ADU option.
Aaron.
Well, Zan, I appreciate you teeing up our purpose and our goals here, because I think to me that this project is an interesting one. If we can get some smaller, more affordable or attainable, genuinely attainable housing for folks in town, and not just really large, really expensive homes. So I think some of those interesting possibilities are in phase 2. So, and we'll talk about what we might keep on the table for that. I think one of the things that's become really clear from the feedback we've gotten from the community is that there are, as other folks have talked about, different parts of town, and they're having very different experiences. So there's like mature neighborhoods, like in the Fraser Meadows area, where there's not a lot of or not a lot of scrapes going on, as opposed to the North Boulder neighborhoods that Lisa and I live near, where there's a great deal of them going on. So I think we're hearing, there these same zones, in some cases, exist in very mature neighborhoods that aren't experiencing a lot of change, and in other places that are. So I think in terms of a phase 1 approach, it seems to me like the ADU options is a great way to go, because I think that gets to the providing of smaller, more affordable living spaces for people in town. In a way that, like per Bob's example, like if you just said, well, instead one 7,000 square feet house, you get 2 3,500 square foot houses, that doesn't give you affordability per his point. But I think if you have a backyard cottage that's 600 square feet, and somebody's able to rent that, I think that does give you another living option. And I think it does it in a way that's really has minimal impact to the neighborhood. And, we've heard from some of the more mature neighborhoods that they're worried about subdivisions and things like that, which we don't have to tackle right now. So I'd love to see this ADU option explored. And the allowing a conversion of an existing unit to duplex or triplex is interesting. I'd look forward to hearing other people's thoughts on that. I don't know how many people would do that. And if it's a reason to nearly scrape a home to expand it, maybe that's a little iffier. But I think definitely as a phase one kind of approach, I'd love to see the liberalization of the ADU options.
So
Cindy?
I just have a question about the option B. Is that for, so I guess it's a question for staff, is that for a big house that's already been built?
It could be.
So was there any discussion about that being something like for the future? I mean, in the future, my guess is nobody would want to do it immediately on a big house that's just been built, but in the future they might. So was there any discussion about that?
No, we thought that, again, if the building is already built and we're trying to like follow the goals of getting more smaller units, it's already there, the visual impact is there, but it would be a better use potentially if it was broken up into smaller units, and that could happen next year or it could happen 7 years from now. I think it's just opening up that possibility.
Can I just add one?
Yeah.
And just part of my thinking there is that I asked that question about driveways and things like that, one nice thing about adding the option to have like a little backyard cottage is that it doesn't require a lot of extra pavement or impact to whatever vegetation you have growing there, right? So it feels like a much lower impact thing to do overall in a way that wouldn't change neighborhood character or vegetation, trees, things like that much.
Cindy?
So I think Mary's observation is a good one about where the issue is happening. And I agree that sub-community planning would be the optimal place to be looking at this. And I agree with Bob. I'm not in favor of any caps either. I'm very concerned that the people who live in these areas are as concerned as they are with what may be happening to them when they thought that they were probably in a pretty stable place. And so I would really like to have us hear from the neighborhood, and I'm thinking North Boulder community, the same area that Mary was mentioning, and hear what the people there think about what's happening in their neighborhood with their sub-community planning before we start thinking that we should be telling people how many square footage they should be living in. I have some real problems with that. I understand what Zan is saying, but it seems to me that that doesn't deal with affordability. Density is a big issue in this town, and there is one group of people who think that density is good wherever it goes, and then there's the larger community. And until we start hearing that as a real solid from the larger community, I don't think that increases in density of this kind really are going to fly. The ADUs are something that are interesting to look at, but again, the fact that there are only so few, 2.6% or whatever in these zones existing now, seems to say that folks don't want those either. So I would really like to hear from the people who live in the area and what it is they would like. And how many demolitions have happened up there in the past, say, 5 years? You gave us
quite a
those.
few, and I think when we talked about this in December, we had that graphic that showed the concentration of full demos and full rebuilds, and a lot of it was in North Boulder.
And were those, again, I think it was Mary who mentioned the spec aspect of what's happening in these areas. And of course, we don't have much say about that either. But I'd been driving around. I went yesterday driving, and in the area that Bob was mentioning, I haven't been in these neighborhoods for a while because there isn't really any reason to go through them. But I was surprised to see how many big houses there are. They're there, and they seem to be quite contentedly so. I mean, they filled out, I didn't see that many empty lots. So, except again, in the North Boulder area, that would be the exception. But in terms of restrictions, I think that horse left the barn a long time ago and is way headed east on sizes. So that's where I am.
Hereby.
If that's clear.
Well, I'll jump on with Mary, Bob, and Cindy. Mary, I think you bring up an excellent point, and that's, I guess, where I originally thought this discussion was going, and it seems to have gotten a little larger than I think what I originally had wanted to see. I think the biggest thing was seeing the amount of emails we've had come in that oppose this. That, for me, is a big red flag. I understand we did the Heads Up Boulder. What's it? Yeah, Be Heard Boulder. And again, but it's not a statistically valid survey. And for me, one of the biggest things is seeing statistically valid surveys, because for me, that's what counts. And so to hear what the people living in those areas experience on a day-to-day basis and what they want, because this is what they bought into, this is their hard-earned money, their blood, sweat, and tears for what they invested into, is something I have to honor, because we each have that right. And so if it was up to me, I don't want to support any of this. And as for the ADUs, we just loosened the regulations, so we allowed one ADU per house. And so I'd like to see how that plays out prior to loosening it even further. I think that's only fair to the policies that we've spent the time working on. So I think that if we had wanted to limit cap size on a house, we should have done it 15 years ago. I think the ship has sailed. I mean, again, I drove around as well, and there's a lot of big houses up there, and that's just the fact. And it's unfortunate in terms of the fact that, yeah, I guess we lost the sweet little homes that were there, but it is what it is now. And I think we looked at those numbers, one of the last study sessions, and saw that it was like 25 per year. So, it's not a mad rush, but it's happening slowly, and it has happened. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. If we do anything, I'd like to hear more clearly from the residents who live there.
Sam, and then Lisa.
So this is a very interesting discussion, and I want to compliment staff for giving us a ton of relevant information to be able to look at and think about and talk through, and the visualization of the options also is very helpful to understand what that would look like and what it would perhaps feel like. I want to start with kind of a high-level look at zoning, and I'm not going to go on in any detail, but this is just about the density of the lots per square mile in Boulder. And so staff gave us this good information. And so RMX1, which is near downtown, has about 6,000 lots per square mile. It's only a half square mile, but it's 6,000 lots within that half square mile. RL1 is about 2,200 lots per square mile, so that's about a third the density of RMX. RE is about 1,100 lots per square mile. So again, half of what RL1 is, and RR is about 800 lots per square mile. So I thought that was interesting just to think about. We're supposed to represent the whole city, and that includes people who are currently renters who might want to own at some point, or people who have moved here and can't find housing. And I've heard from a few people who have moved here, relatively lower income, and have really struggled to find even rentals that they could get into and afford. So that's the context we live in. I think it's important that we think about this kind of from the whole city view to start with, and then we focus in on the areas that we're talking about now. I also don't support a cap. My reason's a little different, I think, than a libertarian type reason, even though there's that leaning as well. But I think we've done our energy code work, and we've done a good job at that. We recently adopted in April, and I think staff said would be implemented in October, the requirement for net zero below, Carl, you want to help me here? 3,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So that's a significant step forward. We accelerated that transition. Now, I realize there's still embodied energy, but it's at least incenting in the correct way, in the right direction. And I think we need to see what that does, what impact that has. And so I won't be supportive of a hard cap or a sliding cap. We have FAR to do that. And in sub-community planning, we can go review FAR and how it works there. So on the other hand, I think that these lot sizes are generally pretty big. 10,000 to 30,000 square feet can bear a little more intensity. And I view density as a tool and only a tool. It's neither good nor bad by itself. It's what you get out of what you do with what you've got that matters. And so I think the idea of having more than one ADU on these larger sized lots is something that will both be very low impact to the neighborhood and will not very much change the neighborhood character, but will by definition be cheaper to rent than a 3,500 square foot house or a room in a 3,500 square foot house. So I'm very much in favor of continuing to explore in these zone districts the ability to put in additional ADUs. I mean, going to 2, the idea here is that we would want to incent the homeowners to do this instead of a scrape or instead of some other thing which is more energy intensive and doesn't produce affordable housing, which is why I agree with Bob that having 2 3,500 square foot homes is not necessarily going to be an affordable outcome, but having 2 ADUs that are 1,000 square feet is much more likely to be affordable. So that's my take on that. I very much want to support looking at that. I think the duplex and triplex conversion of existing homes, I mean, we've seen a lot of that, and it doesn't change the look and feel of the neighborhood. It does have potential number of people and so number of cars impact. So there's a parking question that comes up, and staff address that by requiring a parking space. And on these lot sizes, I think it's easier to be able to do that than it is, in a constrained RL1 or RMX situation where you're trying to put in an ADU. And we dealt with that, I thought, nicely when we did the ADUs. So I would like us to continue. My support is for additional ADUs and for these conversions of existing, and everything else we can punt to phase 2. I also like the survey idea, but it cannot just be the local residents. So a statistically valid survey where we concentrated enough on the local residents that we could get statistically meaningful results from that, but also ask the same question citywide in a statistically significant way, because we have to represent the entire city. And so being able to hear, here's what the neighbors respond and want, and here's what the whole city thinks about this, would give us the kind of information to try and balance the interest properly. I don't think, neighborhood right to vote did not pass, and so I think citywide we don't believe that neighborhoods should have some kind of veto power, but I do agree that their opinions matter because it's their neighborhood. So I would like to see a survey done, but one which we can look at, these are the folks who would be affected and what they think, and this is generally what the city would like to see evolve. And this is just an evolution. No one has to take advantage of any of these things we allow, right? This is not like we're coming in and saying, we're going to put ADUs in all these backyards. This is an additional choice that you can make if you want to age in place or if you want to enjoy the advantages of an ADU. So I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot of promise here, and we should dig to find the promising parts and move those forward.
So I'll start off by agreeing much of what Sam and Suzanne have said, and Aaron. And I personally would like to see a house size cap, but I can also count around here. And it's not dictating what people can or can't, but maybe it is, because at some point with the climate change and with the change in consumption, we have got to quit consuming so much. And we have, regardless of what these large houses, regardless of how net zero they are, they still require huge amounts of embodied energy in order to build them, and they're not using recycled materials, and all their materials are going to the landfill. So I would have supported all A, B, and D. I agree with Sam that we shouldn't just pick on North Boulder, even though I live in the middle of all of this, and the houses and the house size changes are ridiculous, where you had 1,500 square foot houses being replaced by 8,000 square foot houses. 8 bathrooms, 8 bedrooms, It'd be fine with me if this was a co-op or something, but it's not. It's a couple who lives there. So and I appreciate Sam's comments on zoning. I don't want to look at this as just a North Boulder issue. I think it's not just a North Boulder issue, even though it's happening in North Boulder. I've certainly run into quite a few people who live in RL1 who say, I wish we could do that here, because the houses are big in some of the RL1 lots, because as you guys have shown with your research, we have some very large houses, large lots in those RL1s. I think just like, much of Boulder residents do, we need to think intentionally about what we're doing. And I couldn't agree more with Suzanne about we're making future choices, and by continuing to do nothing, we're constricting the future of our children and our children's children and the future of our community. We have an out of balance situation, and I don't think this one project is going to resolve it all in terms of jobs, housing, but I think it certainly could add more housing and make a fair stab at it. I think the city has made deliberate choices in the past. We deliberately bought open space. I'm very happy we bought open space. I think it was a good thing for us, and it has been a great urban shaper. But how we move forward in the next 10, some people say we only have 12 years before doo-doo starts hitting the fan. So, I'm looking at, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Already, people's children can't live here anymore. Already, a huge amount of our workforce can't live here anymore. We're creating barbells. So we have the very wealthy and the very poor, and this is what's in between. So I think anything we can do to help that problem is significant. And I live in the middle of all of this, where these houses are replacing, changing our taxes, and it's not just the county changing the taxes, but when you have a 1,400 square foot house that is taken down, and then a 7,000, 8,000 square foot house is put up next to you, that has a big impact. I personally want to see a lot smaller houses. With respect to the ADUs, I'm fine adding the additional ADUs, but I want to do much more than that. I'm interested, I really like the idea in B of being able to take your house and being able to convert it up to a triplex or even a fourplex. I don't think that changes the nature of the community. We probably have some of the biggest houses now in North Boulder, and they could be subdivided with very little impact and with very little change to the neighborhood. I don't think the response to my question on number of ADUs or OAUs in the RRs and REs, it's not like everybody's going out and doing this. I think the impact, I think people have really created a much bigger storm than I think is going to happen. I can point out certain places that people would like to build a triplex. I mean, I would like people to have, and I know we have problems with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan or some issues that we need to iron out, but I would like to see the option of people being able to construct duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes now in new housing instead of just waiting for that to change. For me, it's, two 3,500 square foot houses are going to be expensive, as Bob points out. But if you can have smaller houses that are up to 1,500, 2,000 square feet, the price point would be much lower. I think this is, so I don't think everybody's going to come out and do these right away. So I'm hoping we can move forward with multiple ADUs, and I'm certainly hoping we can move forward with people's ability to convert to duplexes or triplexes or even fourplexes if they want to. I mean, we have these 8,000 square foot houses. They could be divided in 4 ways.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and give my opinion, and then it sounds like a few other people want to talk, and then we're going to decide, we'll give some guidance, okay? So I guess I'm a little surprised by us. I thought we were going to do a little more here, and we could have saved them a lot of work, and just, so I guess I'm a little, but I absolutely think it falls on us to make the decisions that shape the future. So when people say, well, the ship sailed, big houses are foregone conclusion, I guess, I think it's because, I mean, compatible development, they tried it. It did have some impacts, but not enough. It falls on us to do some more tweaking. And so I guess the future is upon us, and it's up to us to make some decisions. So anyhow, I too would do all ADB, and I thought we were going to. So I'll just throw that out there. I too can count, so it sounds like we'll do another quick round here, because 3 people raised their hand, and then it looks like I absolutely think we should do a citywide survey, and I think that tees us up well for phase 2 too. And then I'd be interested in where there's enough there, which it sounds like ADUs and maybe conversions, we should get more specific. Okay, I have Aaron, Mary, Cindy, and then back to you, Bob.
Yeah, thanks. And I didn't speak to the cap idea. I mean, I think my interest in potential caps would go along with if we consider some of the more the bigger steps in phase 2. That's where I would look at is if you're going to allow a built from scratch triplex, that pairing that with a lowering of the total allowed amount so that there's more of an incentive for it, some sort of giving and taking away options. So I wouldn't abandon that idea entirely, but I would move it to phase 2. So that's my thought. I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it now. I mean, a survey is always useful. I mean, we did do a statistically valid survey on exactly these concepts in the comprehensive plan survey. It's just 3 years ago. And I'm going to throw out a few numbers here real quick because I have it in front of me. That there was a question about whether people would support attached or detached ADUs, and this is all in established single-family neighborhoods. And there were 62% who strongly or somewhat supported that, and 27% who strongly or somewhat opposed it. And the duplex or duplex conversion in a single-family neighborhood had 71% support, 17% opposed. And then the cottage court idea, which we can look at in phase 2, had 73% support and 15% opposed. So I think we found in that comprehensive plan survey strong support for these ideas across the city. So I think, more information, fresh information, always good. But I think that to me was a really strong indication that the city felt like these sorts of ideas were worth exploring. So I think we can move forward. And so I would like to see us do the B and D on that. With the conversion thing, I would just ask staff if we do have support for moving that forward, to just look at how we might tune that so that you couldn't essentially just build a really, well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a new triplex could be a valuable thing, but it's just if you're essentially scraping a 1,500 square foot home to build something 5,000, maybe it's only a certain size of addition that would be allowed for this. I'm not sure exactly what the best course is, but we might want to look at options about what really makes a conversion versus something new.
Mary?
I didn't say earlier about what I would support and what I wouldn't support, and I do like the idea of the splitting, the option B, where you already have the big house, and I actually think that that would be something that would be great all over the city, because that's something that's happened in the past. A lot of places downtown have these large houses that were converted to multiple apartments. So I think that, as Ann said, for the future, I think that would be a great option. And the ADUs, the extra ADUs, I would support. I think I agree with Sam. The energy code has kind of taken care of A. As far as the phase 2, I think that's where it's going to get really interesting about what we can do. So that's it for phase 1. I still would like to see the survey and to drill down into specifics like the drawings that we have here. And then I still would like to see it split out between the North Boulder subcommunity and the entire city, because I maintain that the context matters, and where folks aren't being assaulted like they were in North Boulder, then perhaps it's not necessary yet. But I think that if we do it citywide, where we do these options B and D, it's something for the future.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Because it just occurred to me while you were supporting the survey. I think it would be most useful to do a survey to inform phase 2. I think these things we might be able to move forward with sooner. Were you thinking of a survey before we move forward with phase 1? Because
well, I don't think we have time to move.
That's right.
Do phase 1. So it would be phase 2, and that's where, like I said, it's going to get really interesting there, because that's where you could get affordability. I'm not so sure that, like has been said here earlier, that adding an ADU, that there's going to be that many people jumping on it, but in the future. I mean, I was persuaded by let's think 50 years from now, and that subdivision of a big house makes a lot of sense for the future. And it would be a pleasant surprise if people did do it now, but I kind of doubt it. Anyway, that's all I have.
Cindy, Bob, and Lisa, and then let's see what we do agree on.
I just wanted to say, if this council were going to do any one thing to address the sort of overwhelming issues that we are dealing with in terms of affordability, density, traffic congestion, we would change the zoning so that we don't have so much commercial space. As long as we continue to be filling up the commercial space with those moving into the community or moving from places which are much more expensive than this one, and they're driving up the prices, that's what's driving up the affordability issues. And it's also driving up now the density, so that in terms of livability, as long as we're allowing these kinds of jobs and these kinds of numbers to keep coming in, we're never going to make it. We can't catch up to that kind of thing. And so if we were to dealing with commercial growth in this community, that would be a real thing to do. And that's the thing that wasn't done around 2001, 2002, when the last task force, I believe, convened on that. And it was predicted then that we would be where we are now if we didn't act then. So here we are, and we're talking about doing these kinds of, to some extent, for the people who live there, draconian measures. My fear is that the developers are going to grab this, and they're going to be the ones who are doing this kind of thing rather than the people who live on the ground. And that they'll come and they'll say, oh, let's do this, let's split up this one house into these 3, or let's build a house knowing that we can build 2 ADUs behind it. And they'll come and they'll do this, again, to the neighborhoods, rather than it being organically happening from within the neighborhood itself. And so that's my big fear on kind of moving forward with this, and why I really want to hear the people where they live. And I would also focus with Mary on the North Boulder subcommunity area.
Bob? Oh,
Well, no, I was just going to add one more comment to my thoughts regarding the North Boulder subcommunity as well. It is closer to a lot of amenities, and it's got the transit, and so I think that that's why it's been happening there and not in the other places, or as well as the whole idea of it's different contextually in the other parts of town. So
okay, we have Bob, then Lisa. But I can, okay.
I guess my comment is going to be more a process and timing question on ADUs. I think we heard staff say that in the RR and RE neighborhoods, roughly 2% of the houses had taken advantage of ADUs. I don't know, it sounds like staff doesn't know what percentage of all of our housing units citywide has taken advantage of it. But when we modified our ADU rules back in August, it was 1%. It was 231 units out of about 23,000 single-family units. Now, maybe we've had a big bow wave. We've gone from 1% to 4%, but I'm guessing we probably haven't gotten there yet. So I guess the observation I would make is people in RR and RE neighborhoods seem to be adopting ADUs at roughly the same pace as people in other parts of town, maybe even a little bit more, maybe a little less. But I guess my question, I'm going to come back to what Mirabai said, and I think Mary started to say it too. We only adopted the ADU rules, and we pretty significantly liberalized them less than a year ago. And we're still processing the first batches of people who are applying for this. And while I think it would be an interesting discussion to have at some point in time about whether we should further liberalize the ADU rules in these districts or maybe citywide, I would like to give it some time to proceed and see how the guesses that we made last August, how they pan out. We probably got some of it wrong. We don't know yet. And I look at our calendar. I mean, this council is only going to be together for another 5 months. And I look at our calendar, we've got Alpine Balsam, which we got to deal with. We've got CU South, which we definitely have to deal with. We've got community benefits, which we put on ourselves. We've got 2 big open space and transportation master plans to deal with. We got use tables, which we're going to start tackling tonight. We got to do our annual budget. We have to put the ballot together. We got a lot of work to do in the next 5 months. And I guess I would say that if someone to ask me, is further liberalizing the ADU rules that we passed last year on your top 10 lists, Bob, or even your top 20 list, and I'd say no. Be something to visit maybe in 2 or 3 years, but I don't think we need to visit them 9 months after we pass them. And so while an ADU discussion might be interesting, I wouldn't do it in 2019.
Okay, we have Lisa, and then we're going to...
Clarifying question, Bob. So if I were to interpret what you've said, which is no A, no D, and you haven't spoken on B, it would seem to me like you're basically saying your opinion is to move this all into phase 2.
Yes, I'll move on phase 2. And I'd say the same thing on B. I mean, I heard that we're doing less than 5 a year on this thing, so it doesn't seem to be something that people are really interested in.
Oh, but it's also not allowed in most places. And now I'm not saying that it will be a silver bullet solution. It's just something in the toolbox that people can use. But I'm just trying to interpret. You're basically saying punt this to phase 2.
I would
do
put
any of it.
Well, I would say I wouldn't do any. Well,
That's what you said before.
I wouldn't do any of it. But again, if we're going to have a phase 2, put B and D in phase 2. But I wouldn't do phase 2 in 2019. We have too much to do already.
Oh, no, phase 2 is for the next council.
That's like, so we're saying the same thing. When the next council takes on phase 2, sure, throw B and D in there as an interesting discussion.
Okay, so do nothing now. Lisa, sorry.
So I just wanted to colloquy comment that Mary made about why in North Boulder all the demolitions are happening. And I had asked Carl and Andrew about that at some point when they were first beginning to look at that. And I think part of the reason is that the houses in North Boulder that are being demolished are mostly older than the ones like in Fraser Meadows or in Southeast Boulder. So Southeast Boulder has developed more recently. So I think that's part of the reason. With regard, I'm fine with the survey, but I want to make sure that that we are able to get renters' comments and also workers' comments. And I don't know exactly how we would go about getting workers' comments, but I would like to know that. And we kind of already did that. When we did that survey asking people if they would want to live here and then what types. So I think we just need that brought back up and so we can look at that. But I think it's really important. I think the process that you've gone through so far has been great, and that it has really engaged people, and it has really gotten people talking about this. And that, for me, was the point, is to get people talking about what is our future, and are we going to just stay stuck in our ways? And in terms of the IPP, Cindy, that was back in the integrated planning project. I guess that was in the early 90s. And then we did jobs housing in the early 2000s. And, you know, I was in the same place I am now, trying to change commercial, though, into housing. And didn't have enough support on council to do that. So we just continued to go down the road. There are special cases, and I'm not sure how we address those, but where people who live in North Boulder who have really large lots would really like to do something other than scrape and build a giant house. And right now, that's not permissible for these individuals, and we've heard from them in the emails.
Okay, so just time check. We haven't done phase 2. We haven't finished giving guidance, and we were supposed to be done with this in 20 minutes. So I guess straw poll, the two things I think are on the table, because the survey I think has to do with phase 2, so we'll talk about that in a minute. I guess just straw polls, if people are interested in pursuing phase 1 conversions to duplexes and triplexes. I want to see if we have 5. 1, 2. Oh, sorry. Okay. And then more ADUs in phase 1. Do we also have 5 for that? Okay. So can you turn to those?
Could you just ask about the A, and as Aaron pointed out in phase 2, that he would be okay with a cap size of house if it added some other things to it.
Yeah.
Did I get that right, Aaron?
It's a conversation I'm interested in.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as soon as we talk about phase 2. Okay. So on ADUs, yep.
What's your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. You look like you wanted to say something.
No, it sounded like you wanted to go back to look at the visuals, but
I just wanted to think about, maybe it's just the chart about ADUs. In terms of what we want to bite off here in phase 1, do we want to allow how many more? Or per lot size, or what do we think? What kind of direction do we want to give?
So it seemed to me that what staff had proposed was if you have remaining FAR on a lot, you can put in multiple ADUs. I would suggest we just cap it at 2 and say you can do as much as the FAR will allow up to 2. And that could be 1 internal and 1 cottage, or it could be 2 cottages or 2 internals. But however it looks, I think the FAR limit is kind of the first step. And if you have FAR left that would allow you to build an ADU or 2 ADUs, you should be able to use it. But I would cap it at 2 for now, because I don't think people are going to want, de facto college courts in their neighbor's backyard right now. So like you say, the pace of change that might be digestible, I think a cap will make a little more certainty.
Does that resonate with people?
Well, if you allow 6, you're basically to the cottage court, which
Right.
we'll talk about in
Right.
phase 2.
So, right, there's a bunch of numbers between 2 and 6.
There are, but I think 2's fine as an incremental step.
But we're not agreeing to anything tonight because,
We're giving direction to staff.
okay, because we got to do a lot more community engagement around that, right? Okay.
Right. Does anybody, so in terms of direction to staff, to develop a proposal to get public feedback, all we're doing is allowing 1 extra ADU. This is not revolutionary stuff. I don't think that we're going to have a blowback if we do this. So, okay, so I'm guessing 2 sounds like a reasonable number then.
Just
Okay.
to be obstinate, I'd go for more, but
Yeah, I'm thinking we do not have those votes. Okay. And then in terms of conversions, again, this is just direction to staff, go to develop a proposal and shop it out to the public. Allow conversions to duplexes and triplexes within existing buildings. You wanted to add a tweak on there about size of additions.
Yeah, just think about maybe capping a size of an addition as part of allowing this.
I think that's a very good idea. I mean, because I don't think what we want people to do is take a 1,500 square foot home and turn it into a 4,500 square foot triplex. So I agree with that, and staff can figure out.
Yeah, in terms, basically as an incremental step, if you're talking about
Right.
a conversion, it should be a conversion.
Although, I have to say, if they were going to scrape it and build a big house, I'd rather them do that. So I think trying to figure out where that sweet spot is.
I just have a question, so I guess of my colleagues. So these two things, which I'm not a big fan of, or at least not a big fan of right away, do you guys want to do this the next 5 months? Or do you want to do these two things the next 5 months? I mean,
Yeah. It's in our work plan, it's on our schedule.
But by this, do you mean doing the survey, or do you mean going ahead and putting in the phase one? So with the ADUs, don't we have limits on how long people are supposed to be there before they start applying for one? Or was that just somewhere in the
In
past?
RL1, there's the concentration requirement, so no more than 20% in RL1, but that does not, the saturation. It doesn't apply in RR and RE.
But I think what Cindy's referencing isn't there?
They have to live there.
Yeah, don't you have to live there? There's a residency requirement, that's part of it. And then there had been, can't remember what we did with this, but there had been a requirement that the primary home be in existence for a certain amount of time before the ADU is built.
Right.
Is
But
that-
we got rid of that.
no, we got
That was
rid of that.
removed, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought you
We
were.
That's what
got,
I
my
was
understanding is we got rid of that, and that now you can build a new house with an ADU, and you can be fine. And
So again, my concern is with speculative building. That's
Right, but I hear you. But again, instead of getting a 5,750 mansion, maybe you'll get a 4,000-foot house with 2 ADUs. Hey, that, even if that was a speculator house, that would be better than a big mansion.
I don't know.
Well, the other thing I'll say about it as far as resource efficiency is it's clear that it's cheaper and somewhat less resource intensive to do it in one fell swoop. So if you're building a mother-in-law suite into a home that's a new build, then you don't have to build it without the kitchen and then go back in and convert it. So there's some, argument from the standpoint of efficiency that it's okay to do them at the same time.
Right. Yep.
So I guess I'm just trying to understand from a logic point, if we're going to spend our valuable time doing this, I would hope that we're making an impact. And if you're stating that it's 2% of the homes up there that are doing this, that to me is not a huge number. So I guess the premise for me is that we're doing this in order to create affordability. But if people aren't doing it, we're spending our time to create something people don't want to use. So are you doing this strictly for the future? Or, I guess if you're trying to make a direct impact now, I just think our time is better spent on focusing on affordable housing in areas where, again, we can do more dense and more transit-oriented areas. But I guess it's a question to council.
Well, I think also the two things we're talking about is if you're thinking about scaping your house to build a bigger one, this also says instead of doing that, you could build an internal or an external ADU or two. So it might also be relevant to existing, okay? And the conversions only apply to existing. So, does that make sense? It's not just.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand the fact that people aren't doing it. You're hoping that if people move in or scrape and build something new, that they will do it?
I'm not hoping anybody scrapes.
Well, If they're going to scrape, you're hoping that they'll instead build something with a smaller FAR and then 2 ADUs.
Somebody else help me out, yeah.
So I think it's in direct response to the number of scrapes in the building of very large houses. And Cindy, to your point, there's been a lot of that that's been speculatively driven. So we're getting those scrapes and those enormous houses anyway. And the hope is that we can offer some alternatives here. And so that maybe you keep the smaller house and build a cottage in back, because now you have an option to, keep you in your house and provide a little bit more income. Or, if there is, or if there is a scrape, which hopefully there wouldn't be, that what comes back has some affordable living and not just one huge mansion. So I think you have the potential of preventing scrapes, and you have the potential of adding some additional more affordable living units. And I think the hope is that people would, take advantage of some of this. It's not, I don't think there's any assumption it wouldn't happen.
Well, and the idea is we are providing more choices. Right now, we're not taking anything away. We're just adding more options for people that would enable them to add on to existing and maybe afford to stay there, to have their mother-in-law quarter or that sort of thing, or to convert existing to multiple units. So I think we're just giving choices.
Yeah, I think these choices are useful because somebody, might build a home with an ADU intended as a home office. So it's a separate cottage, and lots of people like to do that, separate their workspace from their home space. And then they sell after their 7 years. And now whoever buys it next has the option of, I'll buy this property and rent that out to help me make the mortgage payment. I think there's, everything doesn't happen in one step. And I guess to your point about the percentage, like Zan said, these are options, and we are trying to entice folks to think differently than the single large home that maxes out the FAR, because it maxes out the value. And this is at least giving alternative value streams to homes. And so if we were going in and saying, you all have to put ADUs here, that would be very different than you may choose to put an ADU here if you would like.
Okay, so, and it sounds like conversions. Do we need to give you more feedback on that idea?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So those two ideas, we're giving direction, some people somewhat reluctantly, but nonetheless, direction to staff to work up those proposals and get public feedback. And they'd come back sometime in the fall.
So then just on a process question, you guys are going to take what we've said tonight, put it together, and then this is going to go out as a statistically valid survey to the neighborhoods and the city, or no?
But I think the statistically valid survey is for phase 2.
Only phase 2, so this is going to happen regardless of...
No, we're going to go have, what will be the public process?
Yeah, I think we would end up drafting up ordinance language and then having open houses so that people can read the language and learn to understand it.
And there will be a public hearing, right? So we will get to hear from the public, not only in the emails and through these channels, but there will be a public hearing where people will come tell us.
I just want it out there so that anyone who's watching can hear this right now and hear what's going to be happening. So.
Right. Okay, and then let's turn to phase 2. And again, this is for the future, next council. So this is helping staff think about what they might want to tee up for the future around, I guess, subdivisions and whatever. Okay, just to be clear.
So when we go into potential subdivision, obviously it raises some issues of density, which I'm going to talk about. And we've already kind of talked about new construction of duplexes and triplexes. This would be a little bit more, there would have to be a little bit more effort put into, design standards, which I talked about before for this. For construction of new duplexes and triplexes. But this is where it gets, where we need some more feedback. So when we get into land use option E, this is if we're trying to get into, it's similar to the ADU idea where there'd be a capped primary residence, and then that additional square footage could go into one or more cottage-sized homes that would be on their own lots. And that those lots could be restricted in size. It could be like 3,500 square feet, and the homes upon them could be capped at 1,500 square feet if we're trying to get more smaller homes. We have also a proposal in the memo that if there were concerns about the number of units that are possible in these areas, it could be, allowed it potentially just one cottage per lot, and that gets at Councilmember Brockett's idea of like the backyard kind of cottage idea. And then moving into a bigger scale site, this is looking at a larger property that could accommodate more units. This is where you get to the Poplar Place idea, where the square footage gets broken down into potentially, in this case, six units. But it does beg the question of what level of additional density in these areas of the city is appropriate, and what should we be putting our energy towards. So we've broken down the option F into three different options. So if we stayed with the current density as prescribed by the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, it'd be 2 dwelling units per acre in the RR zone. RE zoning has the same land use designation as RL1, so it allows 2 to 6 dwelling units per acre, but it's a little more problematic in RR because of that 2 dwelling units per acre, and that's said pretty explicitly in the comp plan. Another option would be option F2, which would be looking at a new land use designation potentially to allow 4 dwelling units per acre, or actually changing those areas to the same land use designation as RL1. So that's what's shown here. So as part of this project, we looked at these particular projects, in particular the Poplar Place project, which has 14 units on an area slightly more than an acre, but it achieved that density through being part of a larger PUD that's actually several acres. Excuse me. Another project we looked at just from a aesthetic standpoint and similar kind of density is Toby's Lane, which is off of 55th. But there's 8 dwelling units on an acre there, so we're in actually the medium density range. But it does have home sizes that are around 1,200 or even 1,000 square feet that provide a visual reference. The thing about these particular subdivisions is obviously when you get to this level of units, there has to be access. There's access lanes, there's more impervious surface, there's stormwater detention requirements that kick in through the subdivision. So these are things just to know. And obviously, if we're looking at doing something at more of a 6 dwelling units per acre, those types of neighborhoods tend to have higher levels of infrastructure in terms of, you know, sidewalks, curb and gutter to handle the stormwater, things of that nature. So we'd have to understand from council what level of change would we be looking at if we were to move in this direction, whether the cross sections, the street cross sections in these areas would have to be changed from the kind of rural cross section, whether on-street parking would have to be included. So these are the questions that phase 2 raises.
I have a question there. Whether or not you've actually looked at the wider infrastructure costs, police, fire, water, sewer.
We did meet with our fire department. We did meet with Public Works. In terms of water and wastewater, we've given them some of the data that we have. They were fairly comfortable, and obviously there had to be more research done, but that the systems could handle in terms of water and wastewater. It was more the stormwater that raised kind of more concerns with the engineers. And obviously when additional density is added, there's additional trips, you know, from the additional units.
And did you, in looking at the larger infrastructure costs, did you also figure out sort of what kinds of densities we might be looking at if this came to build out?
Well, yeah, we have a slide here that shows, you know, if we use the assumptions of 2 dwelling units per acre, 4 dwelling units per acre, or 6 dwelling units per acre, this table shows the potential for new units. Again, if this is applied broadly, and we just wanted this, you know, to the council to be aware of the number of units that could be possible. So in this case, if we were to go with the current density, RE zone is the only one that could potentially add units. So you'd be looking at 250 new units if we use the current assumption. If we were to change the land use plan and increase the density, then, like I say, 4 dwelling units per acre, you get up above 1,000 units for both the RR and RE zone. And again, if you went to 6 dwelling units per acre, which is like RL1 zoning, you'd be looking at the potential for 3,000 additional units. One thing we wanted to point out is obviously because RL1 is already 6 dwelling units per acre, that 2,000 number there is already current, how it is today as far as potential. We wanted to show potential number of new units. Another option that we wanted to put out there if council was concerned, I'm sorry.
I'm just sorry, I just wanted to understand the sentence you just said. In the chart, just say that again. The
In
2,000?
RL1, based on the number of lots
Oh, I see.
that are over 14,000 square feet that have subdivision potential, there are over potential for over 2,000 units in RL1 currently without any changes.
Oh, I get you, with no changes.
In RL1,
One.
not these two.
But that's already allowed. Okay.
Yes, so
Got it.
that's already allowed.
That's
That's already allowed.
That's-
That's just what's remaining in RL1 based on current.
correct.
Okay, and that's if these were adopted, if everybody did them. Lots of ifs. Okay.
One other thing we wanted to add is like a fourth option, and if this is almost like an iterative option, if council was concerned about that intensity or number of units, another option would be, almost like allowing one cottage per each standard lot in these zones, instead of allowing a breakdown. That could lower the number of units, but even then, that would still permit almost 800 units if we were to move forward with that. So we're putting this out for, discussion purposes.
Just to remind people who might be watching, this is in addition to the 20,000 single-family units that we have now, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So this is looking at somewhere between, 1% and 10% of addition. So or 1% and 15%. So just to put it in context, this is in the context of 20,000 or so single-family residential that are there now.
So did you guys look at maybe allowing like an overlay zone or something like that? Because to do something like the Poplar project, you need the land to do that. And there isn't that much land to do that. But I could see doing these pocket neighborhoods in kind of a sparing way in these large RR and RE type neighborhoods. The Poplar project doesn't seem to create any problems in Poplar. And it seems to still have a lot of pervious area, just how they designed the houses and how the little accesses around the house. So not every house has their own driveway. So you can get away from some of those concerns, I think, by the design. But did you consider like overlay zones where somebody might come in and say, I'd like to apply for an overlay zone because I want to do a cottage court here, and then that would be taken, and you probably couldn't do another one in maybe another 2 blocks or something like that?
We thought about that. I mean, obviously, we'd have to figure out what the limiting factors would be to, have it not be so pervasive, but enough that it can happen in certain areas. I think we'd have to understand more what those limiting factors would be and where it would gain support. I mean, I think that's an option, and we don't normally do, overlay zones, but it might be kind of a criteria-based thing where if you, are a certain distance from a multimodal corridor or, something of that nature where you could.
Right. Right, I mean, Poplar's on the Skip, on the 204, groceries, all that.
Okay. Are you almost done?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically
what's the
the
question?
broad overview. So
Oh.
bringing it back to the last 2 questions, we've already talked a bit about question number 3, so.
Okay, yep.
Question. I don't believe you, did you mention it, Carl, but I think in the memo you said that just a strict, simple subdivision you were taking off the table. You were not recommending that approach. Did you address?
Option C went away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder for that. I actually wrote that in my notes here. So yeah, we also did look at what if just hypothetically we were allowing subdivision of those zones in an RL1 nature and just allowed buildings to be built on it, being built up to the current FAR or the proposed cap. And we're recommending that option not move forward because basically, if you're looking at, and what we're saying is that you have to tie the FAR to the existing lot. We don't want the FAR to be more than what's permitted on the existing lot. That's been the part of the assumptions. So with option C, if we were to allow that, you would end up with almost double the amount of floor area on that same area. So that's why we're recommending that not move forward.
Thanks for explaining that. And I support that. That makes sense to me, that just kind of simple subdivision is not going to get us to our affordability goals. So Zane, can I ask a kind of a process question here? So this is next year, right? Somewhere between 2 and 6 of us will no longer be sitting at these tables when this gets taken up. So like, how specific should we be getting here? Because it's going to be a different crowd that's working on this next year.
That's a fine question. What, given that things will shift, how can we be
it could
helpful
be
now?
being specific and enough to inform a statistical survey that we, work on to get public feedback.
Well, and plus, there'll be an election in there, so it may be that framing up, it could be the election is also a way of people giving feedback. But
It's the ultimate feedback.
it is the ultimate feedback. I guess I have one question that wasn't addressed there. Well, we haven't addressed I'm not sure we addressed your question. What was your answer? Just
On
enough
option
to do?
C?
No, just, it was enough to do a survey?
Yeah.
Okay, then I have one more question, which is affordability. One of the things that was kind of, you mentioned in the memo, we could include or not include is the notion of permanent affordability as an extra carrot for some of these options. And I'm just wondering what that might look like.
And that's another way to answer Councilmember Brockett's question, is that it could also inform what we have our economists look at. Right now, we have a proposal pretty much ready to move forward based on council feedback. We have the proposal based on the options that have been developed so that they could look at that and determine what the feasibility of all the different options would be, but also what the possibility would be to enable deed restricting for permanent affordability. It might be like, would there be incentive if, say, we were to move forward with what we're calling the +1 option, allow standard lots, 1 additional cottage, would there be an incentive to deed restrict that? So we have that in their proposal to look at.
Okay.
So when we were looking at the ADU regulations, and we said if you want one that's beyond by right, it will have deed restricted affordability, and what does that look like? It was really helpful to be able to compare what the pure market impact is as far as the return to the developer, and then if something is deed restricted, what the rate of return is, mixing in the market plus the deed restricted, because a lot of times, depending on the assumptions, it's not that negative of an impact. It might take 5 points off, but still be, well above the hurdle rate. So I just would want to ask that we see that comparison anywhere that deed restricted affordability comes in, that we see what it would be like if the deed wasn't there, both on the rent rates or the sale price versus if it were pure market. Great, thanks.
Most people agree with that?
Just following up on that, I wondered if you have any numbers on how many of in the current ADU regs, how many of proposals are for affordable units? None?
Nobody's taken us up on it yet? Okay. Good to know. Okay, so right now you're prepared to do a survey that touches on all these options, and you want us to narrow it down, or just say, if anything, we should take off the table?
And that's where we would need feedback. And I don't think we're going to suggest that option C be analyzed in any way, but if there's anything else that should be taken off the table, it would be helpful.
I'm supportive of all three, personally. Just getting to the next level where we have some analysis and then getting feedback from the community in the form of a survey that gives them enough information to see impacts.
Getting back to Aaron's very good question, what's your timing on this? I mean, when are you talking about doing some of this work this year and then presenting it to the next council?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're ready to work with the economists this summer, because they're going to be, advising on phase 1 options as well. I think we're just going to keep working on this until told otherwise.
We never do that.
But when would the survey go out? Like-
When would the survey go out?
Yeah, are we talking about in the fall? Are we talking about next spring? What, or,
We don't have a timeline yet. I mean, I think we'd have to kind of check in with the next council perhaps on it and then move forward.
And we wanted to get council's feedback tonight before we moved forward with scheduling.
okay.
So I think this would be a retreat discussion for the new council, right? It's like, we've done this much work. We're this far along, we have survey results. Do you want to put it on to understand what we've done as a study session? Or, I think this will make a great tee-up because it's something that's partially done, and there will be other things that are like that. Like, I think community benefit will be in that same state. So the new council can look at stuff that's maybe partially baked and say, is that something we want to keep moving with?
But, colloquy, do you want them to do the survey before the retreat or after the retreat?
Probably after.
Okay, so it's not baked at all, it's mostly just,
It's baked in the sense that they have the modeling and,
okay,
can answer questions of the council.
okay. Does that sound right to people, is to work with the economists to figure out what are some of the better solutions, and then give it to the next council, and then worry about a survey then?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a good approach. Just one thing I wanted to ask you all to look into as you're talking about this. I agree with Sam in terms of looking at deed restriction as an option, how that affects things. But also, and Lisa's point about how you might, like if we were to allow cottage courts, you probably don't want them in every single lot, and so what that might look like in terms of saturation or whatever, something like that. But also, if there's any possibility to vary some of our standards like driveways and things like that, because as to my earlier question, I thought that was one of the appeals of the ADU approach, is that you don't have a lot of additional impervious surfaces. Could you, if you did some cottage courty kind of thing, could you have a little bit of shared parking area and people walk to a house, something like that? So, and do you necessarily have to subdivide to do a cottage court, or can you do, one parcel, so explore some of those approaches, ways that you might take to make them think kind of more livable, but also lighter impact on the land and on the neighborhood.
Do folks agree with that? Because I generally think Poplar Place is this great model. Again, you may not want them everywhere, but you'd want more of them, I would think, or to make them possible. So how would you do that?
I'll agree on that. I don't know how, like, nomad co-housing and wild sage, how they might be different than a cottage court, but that would be another thing to bring back because those are similar in nature. They're both have their own character, but how they fit into the cottage court idea, how co-housing fits in or not.
Yeah. Okay, and then anything else, I guess Aaron's idea about the cap as an incentive, maybe you want to say that better than I just did.
Well, yeah, to throw that into the mix, because I think, maybe you're going to be more likely to get some of these smaller outcomes if you pair them with a reduction in allowed square footage. Something like, well, if you want to build one big house, it can't be that big, but if you want to make it something with a couple ADUs or a triplex, maybe it can be a little bigger, but never exceeding the original allowed square footage.
Do folks agree with that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's some dissenters here. Yeah.
Well, agree with exploring that in a survey.
And I'm by no means saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying these are items for discussion.
I think the only people that get votes are Sam, Mary, and Mirbai, because they're the only ones who are definitely going to be here next year.
Mary?
So one just comment on the cottage courts in terms of where they could be. If we're talking about they're not going to be everywhere, they're only going to be in some places. Putting them closer to transit lines might be one thing that we consider.
Okay, anything else on this?
I guess I'll just say, in response to Bob, Phase 2 will be at the will of the next council. And so having detail about what they're looking at is, I think, helpful to them when they decide what they want to do with it. And I would bet that there are a couple incumbents who might run a race who we'll see back again as well, so.
Okay, then. On that note, let's move to something really exciting.
But thank you for
Yeah,
all this work.
Thank you for all the good work.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, the illustrations, the way you did that, really, really helps clarify.
And I like the way you organize things with the little yellow box.
Little yellow box.
I like that.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'm good, thanks. These are like stairs.
Are you guys ready to roll? Okay.
Shall we begin?
Yep.
Okay. So moving on, our second topic tonight is a discussion about the use standards and table project, which also includes a discussion about the opportunity zone, which is a component of that. So as part of this discussion tonight, we have basically it broken into two pieces. The first piece would focus just on the overall broader aspects of the project with respect to the project scope, the why and purpose statement, the goals, and reporting back on the community engagement. This is something that's been in process for some time now and that we've been working with our planning board subcommittee on, but we wanted to talk to council about the broader aspects. The second piece of it will be focusing on the specific changes to the opportunity zone. So this is basically a follow-up from our discussion on April 2nd. So the first question, just to tee it up, and we'll get back to this, is what feedback does City Council have regarding the subcommittee's project scope, why and purpose statements, the timeline, goals, and areas of consideration? So basically we want to learn from council tonight is, are there any pieces of it that are missing? Are there any considerations or pieces of the project that should be modified or removed? And are 15-minute neighborhoods a priority area of consideration for this project? And then the second piece, again, this question relates to what feedback does council have regarding the proposed use table changes to address concerns about future development within the opportunity zone. So there's basically 7 topics that we've outlined in the memo that we want to discuss, and I'll get back to this later. So we have the near-term part of this project is to really focus on those opportunity zone changes with the goal of bringing an ordinance back sometime this summer for council consideration. And then the second piece would be the longer term going into next year, the longer term discussion with the community about potential changes to the use tables in different parts of the city. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Andrew to give you some of the background and report back on community engagement.
Thanks, Carl. And feel free to stop me if you have any questions or if you need to speed up or slow down as well. So the first part, I'm going to touch on the overall project and the subcommittee work thus far. And so this project initially was identified by the Planning Board and City Council as a work plan item for 2018. There was a subcommittee formed, which is 3 Planning Board members appointed by the Planning Board as well. The purpose of the project is to align the use table and standards of the land use code to the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan and identify areas where it could be out of alignment and how to potentially fix that. So the subcommittee, comprised of, again, 3 Planning Board members, serves to guide the project and make recommendations. They act as a sounding board for ideas and help to engage with the public. We've held 7 subcommittee meetings thus far since this summer, and they are advertised and open to the public to attend and provide feedback on. And really, the subcommittee has established the scope and goals and what they're calling the initial areas of consideration or topics for further study moving forward. They've also looked at the opportunity zone changes that Carl will have in the second part of this presentation. So briefly, the project seeks to again align the table of the land use code with the BVCP policies. It looks to do two things specifically. One is structural and technical changes to the use table to help make it more legible and understandable. And secondly, as Carl touched on, they want to explore some of these broader planning concepts, such as 15-minute neighborhoods, and how some tweaks to the tables may help to encourage some positive changes that the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan envisions. And part two of their work will probably spin off into other projects, such as the sub-community planning efforts as well. So really quick here, the scope of the project is only limited to Chapter 9.6 use standards, which includes the actual table itself, as well as any specific use standards, and then ancillary sections such as definitions. It does not include any form, bulk, or intensity chapters of the land use code. So no floor area, no setbacks, et cetera. Again, the purpose is to align Chapter 9.6 of the Land Use Code with the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan and to help enable the desired development outcomes it envisions. So subcommittee identified a series of broad goals for the project, and we want to get your feedback on these as well. So the first is to simplify the use table and to streamline the regulations where possible. Second is to create more predictability and certainty in Chapter 9.6. They also want to identify any community-desired land use gaps, such as community-supported agriculture, other tweaks to live work, things like that might not be currently addressed in the table itself. And also to address things where the current list of uses may not have resulted in the most desirable outcomes or had unintended consequences. They also want to look at ways the use table can better align with the city's energy, climate, and waste goals as well. So as we talked about a little bit before, they are interested in the exploration of 15-minute neighborhoods, looking at home occupations and how that land use could be tweaked to allow more flexibility. Live-work units, looking at whether those are actually functioning as is envisioned in the comprehensive plan. Are there opportunities to make tweaks? Looking at maker spaces, do we have a use category that captures what we're seeing now with some of the 21st century kind of economy and businesses, as well as co-working spaces, which may not fit into our current office land use designations. So again, yeah.
Could I ask you, some people seem to, would looking at that also update our office space categories? Or is that something totally different? Because some have said that we need to modernize them.
Yeah, I think it would include modernizing our office uses and definitions, as well as potentially with a opportunity zone work as well. Yes, for sure. And so the engagement with this has just piggybacked onto the large homes and lots events. So we had, again, open houses in February, and then an online questionnaire as well. So we asked just broad, high-level feedback at these events. We asked people to vote on some boards on there, whether they agree or disagree with the subcommittee's areas of consideration and goals. Then also to tell us, where they live, work, and play on a big map, and then identify what land uses they wish they had more of or less of nearby. And the online questionnaire asks the same questions to get some high-level feedback. So in general, what we heard from the community was that the greatest agreement they had with the subcommittees and projects areas of consideration were to update outdated use categories. There's also support for changing prohibited uses to use reviews where certain uses may be warranted, things like coffee shops or local grocery stores that are more walkable or of interest. Opportunities for more mixed use, then also looking at getting more diverse uses near non-residential or industrial areas. People were in agreement with changes to the use review criteria that would better serve walkability and site design goals of the city. Then also diversifying housing types, the use table changes, and then studying and exploring changes to incentivize more 15-minute neighborhoods as well. Also some level of agreement to further explore some changes to the light industrial zones into the future. Least amount of agreement with the areas of consideration tended to center around increasing development design standards, changing the amounts of required land uses for certain residential, non-residential percentages we have now. So things we might require, let's say, 25% ground floor uses, tweaking those numbers, there was less support for those types of tweaks. And then also less levels of agreement for creating new use definitions, as well as allowing active or retail uses in public zones.
So I have a question here. So when you say there was more agreement with the following areas of consideration and then least agreement, these are across different types of respondents, would you say? For instance, I can see the first two bullet points being something that the business community in general would have a hard time with. And so would you, I mean, do you have any idea, when you had agreement, was it mostly agreement between residents and the business community? And when there was a disagreement, it was more of a split like that? Or can you describe it for me a little bit?
Yeah, it's more looking at simply just dot voting, how many dots were placed next to each of these areas of consideration. So it's not broken down by any specific detailed information. An online survey, we had them, I believe, choose neutral, agree somewhat, agree greatly, or disagree greatly. And that also helped to weight out their level of agreement, but it's not broken down by different, business communities versus residential citizens.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Getting high-level feedback just to kind of open up a discussion with the community about 15-minute neighborhoods. We had them identify on a map where they live, and then tell us what land uses they wish they had more of or less of nearby, and same with where they work and where they play or dine and eat. And generally speaking, it's all very similar, more mix of uses, more access to restaurants and shops and transit and green space. We heard they wanted less. Question? Okay.
Do you have a map showing where 15-minute neighborhoods might be?
So we're working with our transportation planning team, and they are developing with a new TMP update on that. So this might feed into that moving forward. That's kind of our hope, to kind of spin off and to kind of work with them on that.
Excellent, thanks.
And so, yeah, typical things you might hear. So people want less traffic, less density in some cases, less fuel stations, drive-throughs, those sorts of things. So the first question we have for council on part one is really, is there any additional feedback on the project scope, why and purpose statements, timeline? Is there anything that's missing, anything else you want to add as well?
I have a really lame one, which is under your why statement. It says we may need to align things. I think that we know things are out of alignment, that's why we're doing it, so I wouldn't make it so, but that's really minor.
I mean, when's the last time these were reviewed? It's been a while, right, since a comprehensive review was done?
Yeah, probably the 90s, I would guess.
Right, and that alone is a reason to go look at it, is to make sure that the use tables evolve to be, where the current community needs are, because I think if it was the 90s, things have changed a lot since then.
Right, we know they need updated, yeah. Yep.
I have just a little comment on office space. And while, we certainly, or I don't want to encourage lots of large new jobs coming into Boulder, we do have small homegrown businesses, and I want to make sure that we do accommodate those. And I know in like some neighborhoods where they have neighborhood centers and offices, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a term that says, it needs to be, whoever's in that office needs to be serving a neighborhood use. And so I have, a story from the 90s where I had some friends who were working at one of these neighborhood shopping centers, but they sold books, or they made books kind of nationally and internationally. And while they could walk to work, and it was a small office, the city closed them down because they didn't serve necessarily just neighborhood purpose. But it was a good thing for them in the sense that they could walk to work. And so I guess I'd like some flexibility in there so that we're not so hardcore on everything.
In the topic 5 is office and residential zones, right? So we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
so, no. So any other considerations on why, purpose, scope, goals, areas of consideration?
Well, I think there's a question that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I mean, I think they're solid. You just have this additional question about our 15-minute neighborhoods of priority area of consideration. I would say yes, to the extent that we can work into this project, that we can get more, walkable live, work, play neighborhoods, please.
Does everybody agree with that?
I have the,
Okay, yes?
I would just add that it doesn't always have to be shopping, but that these neighborhoods, these 15-minute neighborhoods could be parks, could be some amenity that doesn't necessarily involve commerce.
Great point.
I mean, I thought that to that end, the places that the subcommittee, the planning board subcommittee chose for their meetings were awesome in, moving around to different areas that were like the Alpine Market up on whatever, 9th and College, 9th and University. Anyway, I just thought that was nice, and that kind of emphasized and led a flavor to focusing on that. And so I agree with Aaron.
Okay. All right. Okay, should we dive into some more details then?
Anything else on the broader aspects of the project, or are we ready to jump into Opportunity Zone? Okay. All right, so the second part is really to discuss the potential code amendments that we're working on that we talked about on April 2nd, so this is a follow-up. So obviously our focus in going through the use table was to look at ways to change the use table in ways that could increase housing capacity, reduce non-residential capacity relative to like office uses to offset the jobs housing imbalance, and also maintain the potential for retail uses. So a real quick summary, this is the Opportunity Zone bounded by Arapahoe, 28th Street, Airport Road, 55th, and the diagonal. These are the zoning districts that are in the Opportunity Zone. So just to follow up, we talked about this before. We went through the use table, and we presented to council a number of different changes that we thought could work towards those goals. We feel that at the April 2nd meeting, City Council was generally in support of a lot of those changes. We've talked about the limited use option, where we would try to collapse portions of the use table and pull some of those pieces out into limited use categories so that we could have something between an allowed use and a conditional use that would have a one-line unique land use characteristic. So we're still working on that. It's still a work in progress, but this slide kind of gives you an idea of what that's looking like, and we'll be bringing that back.
So just to be clear, because we did get some email on this, the L designation, they're non-substantive, correct?
Well, some of the ones that we're going to talk about tonight would be changes beyond what's shown up here on this slide. And that's where we need to get more feedback from the council. Most of the L stuff is definitely non-substantive. It's really a restructuring, pulling things out of the use table that are a little confusing and putting it all in one place where there's one line land use restrictions. Mm-hmm. So the question that we have for council tonight is, what feedback does council have regarding the proposed changes with respect to these 7 items. So we've broken the presentation down into 7 topics. These are the areas where we didn't really sense consensus on the council that we needed more feedback on. So I could go one by one and we could have a discussion, and we have a matrix in front of you that goes through each of these. Do you want to do one by one, or should I just run through all of them?
One by one.
Okay. All right, so the first one is efficiency living units. So one thing that staff had suggested was the current requirements in the code basically say there are an allowable use in most zones up to the point where if they're more than 20% of the on-site units, it becomes a use review. And we felt that if the city is trying to encourage or incentivize smaller units, that perhaps maybe that threshold should be removed and they should just be allowable at any percentage. So that's what we had recommended last time. There was a discussion that perhaps we should look at adding some sort of deed restriction to any percentage of above a certain point. So we've added an option C, which we've basically proposed that if you have any ELUs in a project that are over 50%, that then those units over 50% would be deed restricted. So that's what was a council suggestion. We're continuing to recommend option B, which is just to make them allowable. We're trying to look at ways of incentivizing this. We're concerned that option C may disincentivize more ELUs, but we wanted to put that out for discussion.
So so how many ELUs do we have in the city right now?
We don't have that figure here tonight.
But it's not a lot.
Not many, no.
Yeah, and so this would be basically to get their 450 or 475?
475 is the max. Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know, I'll give him feedback. Is that okay?
Yep, jump right in.
I would go with B and go with your recommendation.
Is everybody cool with that? Seems like smaller units is a good thing. Yeah? Cindy?
I have concerns about how many units in one particular building could be built. I mean,
It depends on the zoning district, and there's a 2-to-1 allowance for ELUs because of their size.
Wait, say that again?
There's a 2 efficiency living units count as 1 dwelling unit, just because.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
so if you could have 30, you'd have 60, if they were allowable across the board. I'd have to know the maximum sizes before I'd be okay with that. That's what I can say.
Okay.
Maximum size, the number of units?
Right, number of units. Thank you.
All right, I think everybody else gave a thumbs up. Is that right? Okay. But it's something worth thinking about, but I think.
Yeah, I'm concerned about just having this just a maximum. I mean, since I don't know.
It depends on the zoning district and the land use area. Yeah.
This is across zoning districts.
But if it's a whole lot of units, it goes through site review and people say things like, hey, how about a variety of units? Right? So, there you go,
So if
Cindy.
it's a whole lot, it goes through site review.
A whole lot?
Yeah.
More than, but not,
There's a
It
specific
depends
number.
on the zone, but yeah, I think a lot of larger projects would trigger site review.
okay, that makes me more comfortable.
Okay. Topic 2.
So another thing we brought forward to council was looking at single-family homes in high-density residential zones. So how do we incentivize attached housing in those zones? We had originally, in option B, proposed prohibiting single-family units in the RH zones, the high-density zones. Looking at this further, we did get some data back. So there's about almost 13,000 units in the high-density zones. 321 of them are single-family homes. We've changed our recommendation to option C and want to get some feedback from council on it. We're proposing that you just change it to use review. And the reason we're suggesting this is because The concern about prohibiting them is that we might end up incentivizing a developer to scrape, potentially historic single-family homes and replace with larger structures, and that it might be better to just encourage that they keep that structure but convert it so that you could do a single-family home through use review. So it would disincentivize the single-family use, but would still allow the flexibility of having a single-family unit without doing something that could potentially have unintended consequences. So we're recommending option C.
So could people take a single-family house and convert it into triplex?
Today? Yeah.
Thanks.
Aaron?
So would you craft criteria around that for the purposes of the use review?
I don't think, we didn't think that this one particularly needed additional criteria. We followed the approach of the mixed-use zones. So when the mixed-use zones were crafted, they wanted to disincentivize single-family, and they did that through use review. So we're basically just applying that logic to the high-density zones.
I mean, are there criteria for that case?
No,
So it's just the regular use review?
The regular use review.
And would you be able to take advantage of that for building new as well as for, like, say, an expansion of a?
Yeah, it would be a new single-family home, or an expansion would have to go through use review.
So I guess my feedback on this is, I mean, I'm generally supportive. I don't feel like we need to make all the existing ones non-conforming. Like, I don't like that idea. But, and so use review gives a bit of an out to that. But I guess I don't feel like a lot of single-family homes is the best use of high-density residential. And you might have a case where that somebody might spend a lot of money and build a single-family home. So I might think about putting in a little footnote in there somewhere to think about some criteria that for building new.
Well, I was just going to, can I just ask that question? Can it be for new ones and not existing? Right? I mean.
Yeah, it would be if
it would
somebody
just
wants
be
to
for
build
new.
a single-family home in an RH zone, it'd be through use review.
But would it affect existing? You said it would incentivize
It
them
would affect
scraping,
existing if they were to expand.
but, oh. Well, so, because I guess that's the distinction, is expanding on an existing one, to me, is different than trying to disincentivize more.
It is, yeah. And so I'm just looking for some finesse then to what you come up
Get
with
us
to
there.
address that. And that, because I think generally the use review criteria, a single-family home would probably leap through those really easily because you don't have a huge impact on your neighbors and things like that. So
some sort of criterion specific to that.
Yeah.
And again, that's why we're suggesting the limited uses, because you could add an L and say that this requires use review and it's subject to this special use review criterion.
yeah, and I mean, it could be something like, you have an odd parcel that wouldn't fit an apartment building, and so it's kind of the only thing you could do there, something like that.
So that's what I was going to ask, is for those 300 that you've got out of 13,000 units or whatever, are those typically on odd parcels or were built before the zoning became RH?
They were built before it was RH zoning.
Right, so their lot size probably isn't conducive to an apartment building generally, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like many of these lots will be built with an existing non-conforming single family there. So I think this suggestion neatly finesses all of that, and I don't think you should say new build or existing, because almost all of them are existing. And so the time that you would have a chance to intervene would be if there was going to be a scrape, for instance, right? If somebody was proposing to scrape one, it would go through use review at that point. And then there would be some influence of the city over kind of what went there, or if it was big enough that there could be RH, then presumably staff would look at multi-unit there. So
Just a question.
I like it.
What level of change would require a use review for an existing?
Any kind of expansion.
So expansion of square footage?
You don't get 10% for free?
No. But it wouldn't be limited to 10%.
Perhaps that's something that we could put as a criteria.
Yeah.
It triggers use review if it's an expansion of more than X percent.
We should just think about some sort of de minimis exception.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to folks? But otherwise, everybody okay with C? Okay, topic 3?
Okay. So the next topic is residential and the business regional zones. So currently residential is allowed on the ground floor. Staff raised this issue with council that, perhaps we might want to look at doing something similar to the business community zones where we require the residential be brought off the ground floor. That was our original suggestion. One council member suggested maybe we look at just a cap on the percentage of residential on the ground floor, and 75% was suggested. We feel like we can agree with that, so we're recommending option C.
Some folks wrote us and said, yeah, but what about 29 North or whatever? But, so they can throw a coffee shop on the bottom floor and call her good, right?
So modify the use table to allow up to 75% of the ground floor of buildings to be residential.
In the business regional design.
Right, in the BR. So what does staff think about 75%? I mean, it seems like business regional is intended to be mostly community serving businesses, is that right?
No, it's actually our most intensive business zone. So it's not like a personal service zone. It's really designed to support, large floor plate users, office space, retail, large retail users.
Right, large retail users. So is this the Boulder Valley Regional Center?
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah. So 75% of the ground floor of buildings to be residential. I mean, I understand the 29 North counterexample, but that number seems high to me. 75% seems like an awful lot in a business district.
I don't know who came up with that or what the rationale was.
I think it was me, and I thought that I had suggested that if it were affordable housing.
And I think it's mostly, we're trying to preserve ground floor retail and commercial activity, right?
Right.
But it could be apartments above, right? That's the goal here? Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was the one council member who brought this up originally, and I think maybe you threw in the 75%, maybe. But I mean, I think that the idea is that we need more housing, and so if we place, if you have a decent sized parcel, I mean, then making the whole ground floor need to be retail is, I think, restrictive. It restricts your ability to do housing. So 75% seems like a reasonable amount to me, because then you get some retail. I mean, if you look at a decent sized parcel, that's probably about what you need to front the street, is about 25%, on a bigger parcel. So that's, I think it makes a certain amount of sense. I think once you get much less than that, you're going to disincentivize residential in a way that I don't think is a great idea.
Mirabai.
Could we change it and write it more like how we did with the other ground floor zoning where?
BC 1 and 2.
Yeah, BC 1 and 2, where we talked about where it did actually front the street, and then around the back we could allow it. I think we had kind of done it that way, and everyone seemed to be pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with that. I agree with that, and I think what we need to do here is have this be a use review, because it depends on how the building is configured, what the number might be, right? If it's on a corner, for instance, you might be able to do retail on, the street front on both corners, and then it would make sense to put the residential on the ground floor behind that. And so it seems like it's context dependent to me. And so I think this one maybe should be a use review to be able to get the planning department, since you know the intentions of what we're trying to do in the zone district, to shape the project so that we get that. And that would be another way to do that.
But the goal is, you know what the goal is. And I think it's so do that, or if you have a better suggestion, I think I'm open to it. I think that it mostly comes up when we imagined redeveloping a strip mall where suddenly you're taking over surface parking, then this 75% number requiring it, the whole downstairs doesn't make sense. But for most places, I think 75% does. So anyhow, I don't know, if use review isn't too restrictive and onerous.
And just to clarify, I think you might be alluding to conditional use review, like the staff level, like a C in the use table?
Yes, I was thinking a staff, and if it's a conditional use review, can that be called up by planning board?
No.
No, okay. But a use review can.
Yes.
But if it's really big, it's going to require a site plan review probably anyway. So, okay, I think, I think conditional is fine with me, just so long as staff has a look at it and it's not just a number, because that number is, context dependent probably.
Yeah, and you could write in those conditions to address the concerns, right, that you're getting street frontage,
Lisa?
So would this include any permanent affordability?
We did not propose that.
And is there a reason why not?
I mean, again, it's trying to propose something that might
That would incent people?
feasible, yeah.
Yeah, my only concern, and I'm fine with this, but my only concern is a lot of the new apartments that we're getting that are for rent are incredibly expensive. So if you, what's the one I always mention? The Park.
Well, it used to be
Park
East Point.
Mosaic.
Yeah.
Just look on their website. Huh? Yeah, yeah. Just look at their rentals, and I think I saw one of them over $10,000 a month. So I would rather have some kind of housing that is permanent, that is maybe deed restricted or affordable. I don't think we need any more super high-end apartment complexes. So it's just a concern I have. So I guess I would like to see some permanent affordability in this somehow.
So Carl, can I ask you, are we going to see office in BR zones as well? Thank you.
We done with this one? Or?
Oh, okay. Well, and at one point we were talking about in opportunity zones, how do we see how to maximize the public benefit or increase the public benefit in the form of affordable housing? That might be different than this exercise, or is this where we would make that happen?
I mean, we didn't expect that these changes would, wholly meet all the different goals. It would help towards moving towards those goals. I think we're looking at future changes that might come out of the East Boulder subcommunity plan that would also address that as well. But just as targeted changes, this is what we're proposing.
One more question, and then. When we do these changes, would the moratorium then be lifted, or after East Boulder's finished?
After these changes are initiated.
Okay, so we might need to circle back to affordable housing. Yep.
I was going to pick up with that. Zan, I have heard from people in the community who have suggested, I don't know how they would dare do this, that perhaps we should be doing a subcommunity or a subcommunity type plan on this area before then doing these zoning changes, so that we actually know what we want to get that kind of community benefit at the outset. But there were three things that we were looking at from the opportunity zone to extract the value from it and get public benefit, not lose any of the affordable, and no excess office. So in terms of addressing all of this, it feels like we're doing it kind of piecemeal, and it has been suggested it's sort of a cart before the horse, and since it goes across the whole city, there may be unintended consequences that we're not able to see right now. So I'm just raising those concerns, and maybe staff has something to say about that, or we have something to say about that.
Well, how about this? Two of those three are going to be coming up here in these topic areas. So why don't we finish going through this list, and then we can circle back to affordable housing. How about? Okay, does that work? Because office is coming up, and preservation of existing is coming up. Okay.
So the next topic was a suggestion by a council member about trying to relax the regulations that we currently have in the industrial zones relative to restaurants. So right now, to do a restaurant in an industrial zone is a conditional use. It has to meet specific criteria. Generally, the criteria talk about, you can't go over 2,000 square feet in most of the industrial zones. I believe one of the zones, IMS, has a lower 1,000 square foot limit. I think the biggest inhibiting factor might be that there's a requirement that they not be on major streets. So I think a lot of restaurants, prefer to be on major streets, like a strip kind of mall development, and it prohibits that. So it's really meant to service the employers in that area. So that would be probably one of the bigger things that we would have to look at to see whether we want to remove that. We're actually recommending that this change be deferred, just so that we can hear more from the community and the employers in that area as part of the East Boulder subcommunity plan, but it's just so that we're approaching this correctly. So that's what we've put down in option C. But we certainly could move forward with the option of taking out that major streets provision, if the council inclined.
A long time ago, we didn't allow restaurants to have signs on them in industrial zones, but I am assuming we do now, so they can have signs. And so you're just suggesting that maybe we want to let them be on major streets as well.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
you wanna
I
get
think
more
that's the reason why
feedback.
we don't see a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea. I would like to see more restaurants there so people don't have to go out and drive for lunch. It's
They'll
been,
be able to take scooters, though.
She said we can take a scooter.
oh, scooters, yeah, don't have to scooter down. But anyway, I think it makes sense, and it makes them more humane,
So
more
you're
normal.
suggesting don't wait, do them now?
Yeah, I would go ahead, but I mean, it just seems like it's another obstacle, and it just makes it more urban and more of a city, or more, I think, I mean.
Good.
And if a few people from outside of the industrial zone come to the restaurant, I think it's not going to kill us.
No, it would be good for it. I mean, this is something I've watched because I work out in Flatiron Park, and so there have been delis that have struggled in there and have gone out of business, and now there's some places that are extremely popular, but there's not enough of them. Come the popular times, they're really congested and packed. So I think we do need to do this, but I would prefer to listen to staff on this one, because I think it needs a little bit of thinking about, because you don't want them necessarily displacing the industrial uses. You want them augmenting the industrial uses. So I think that's the one caveat I would put out there is, and we have a few different industrial zones. There's IG and IS and the different ones. And so I think it takes a little more thought than just making a sudden change. But
Do we expect the results of the East Boulder plan to be, what's the time frame? In a year and a half?
Next summer.
We could probably hang on a year. I'd be okay with that. Yep. Oh,
Oh, you're thumbing.
no, we're voting.
Well, I mean, this was my idea too, and so I'd move forward with it now. But I mean, when we talk about the East Boulder subcommunity plan, so I know we're going to be getting feedback that's specific to that subcommunity, but are we looking at potentially making broader zoning changes, like to all of industrial zones, based on the feedback from the?
Potentially.
Okay, so that's on the table as something that we could do. So I guess, if we put a good bookmark on it and could revisit as part of that discussion, it could work.
I have a broader question. One of the purposes of this exercise is to start to bring zoning districts out of the moratorium, is that right? And so by deferring this decision, does that mean the industrial zones stay in the moratorium? Or what actions caused them to move out the way the BC's already moved out?
I think we just felt that the industrial zones are going to require a little bit more analysis so that we avoid unintended consequences, and that we thought that the moratorium could still be lifted as part of these changes, and we could enact future changes through the subcommunity plan.
Yeah, I'm cool with the time for the subcommunity plan. Does that mean that the industrial zones stay in the moratorium until the subcommunity plan is passed, or can they come out?
That's not what we were proposing.
Okay.
So that brings up an interesting point for me, Bob. The other thing that needs to be in the mix in the industrial zones is housing. You know, one of the conversations we've had is, can we increase housing opportunity in the industrial zones? And that requires a lot of analysis. And so as part of that sub-community plan, I think we can do these analyses together, you know, restaurants, other uses, and housing. But the staff has cautioned us to move slowly in the industrial zone so that we get the analysis done. So I'm comfortable bringing them out, but I still think as part of the sub-community plan, we need to be looking at all of that.
Yeah.
Will we be looking at, what is one of the things we'll be looking at, how much industrial we've lost as a community?
Yeah.
That would be very helpful, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so okay with holding off on the restaurants until the East Boulder Community Plan, but with a big fat bookmark to try to get her done within the year? That work? Okay.
All right, so the next one, again, looking at the use tables with the lens of how do we address the jobs, housing imbalance, one idea that staff proposed was, you know, one idea you could do is prohibit offices in the residential zones. So there was some concern about that, and maybe that we should just allow smaller scale offices in the zones. So have a little bit of data, I think, here as far as amount of office.
Is this for the home office stuff?
No, this wouldn't be home occupation. This would be actual office uses.
So live, work? No?
Or just actual offices that were
Oh, I meant
approved
where
through
you
use
live,
review.
where you work next, near, aren't we talking about like in a holiday neighborhood where there's offices sprinkled in?
Yeah, and
Okay, I
that
call
would
that
have
live work.
required use review to be approved.
All right.
So we did have our data folks kind of look at this. There are basically, let's see, there were some concerns about the RMX zone that perhaps we should, the city should look at being more restrictive about offices in that zone based on the amount of office that's already there. So just pointing out, there are 29 properties that would be impacted by a change to that, and there's 91 firms that are in the RMX1 zone, so I just wanted to put that out there. Also, there's about 225 properties in residential zones in total that would be impacted if there were changes to this. So if we were to move forward, what's suggested is still allowing use review for offices in these zones, but capping it at 1,000 square feet. Today, the current regulations don't have a square footage cap. So we thought this would be, you know, a way to get moderate-sized offices, but again, with the use review process. So our original recommendation was to prohibit, so we've shifted that to the option C based on suggestions from council.
Could there be a max to that? I mean, I know it's depending on how much is allowed within the zone, but,
Capped at 1,000 square feet.
well, yeah, I
Oh,
do. I mean
saturation.
saturation. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, that would be
Well,
helpful.
Is there criteria that would go with the reduced review?
I mean, it's just the typical use review criteria.
Okay, for those of us not on planning board?
They really speak to impacts and operational characteristics and how a use would interface with the existing uses that are around it. So it's really about impacts.
Does that get?
There is actually one specific criterion in the use review criteria that says there's a presumption against conversion of residential to office in certain areas to avoid that in around the downtown, to try to keep that residential concentration downtown.
I was a question about the impact statistics you mentioned. But those already exist, is that right?
That's right.
So when you said that they would be impacted by this, how would they be? Wouldn't they be kind of grandfathered?
Well, like for instance, if there was an office that was more than 1,000 square feet, and they wanted to expand.
Well, only if they changed.
Right.
It'd be non-conforming use or grandfathered or whatever words you want to use.
Correct.
They wouldn't be affected by this change, only expansions or additions.
Right.
To what exists now.
Aaron and then Lisa.
So when you talk about a 1,000 square foot cap, would that be for the building or for the individual spaces? Like if you had office condos?
I think we'd be talking about the site, on the site, because then people could, break up and have multiple offices at 1,000 square feet that could be of more impact.
But when you say site, is that building? Is that parcel? Is that
parcel?
So it would be on a per parcel basis. So of the land.
But there again, if it's X amount of however big the parcel is, this is why the saturation that I was curious about that. Since we do have this horrific imbalance that I was talking about earlier, I don't know why we would be permitting more office in what might be residential.
Lisa? Oh,
Do
Except to
you
be
mind if I just
friendly.
answer that? I mean, the reason is to have the live-work ability, not in the same building, but to have in the same neighborhood. And so, full disclosure, this is me. I have an office across the street from my house because the Holiday neighborhood is a mixed-use neighborhood. And it's like a 650 square foot office, this little thing. But I'm not the only one. There are a number of people who walk to work because their office is in the neighborhood. And it's an HOA. I think there's like 10 little office condos in there, but I think it's shared ownership of the land. So, it's only like 4,000 square feet of office, but it's one parcel. And I think that's a real positive thing. I think it works out really well.
And I would say, I think that's positive. It's just, if it gets out of hand, if it gets out of hand. So that's why I wanted to know what the larger space was. How much of the larger space is this? Like in your instance, it's preferable, right, to have people to be able to work there.
I'm sorry, Lisa was next.
So are there any restrictions on the type of office use in this particular case?
I think it just goes by the definitions of office. It's not too specific.
But each zone has allowed uses in it. Because there are certain kinds of uses that are allowed in certain zones in offices and not in others.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, in your case, that was purpose-built. And I think what this is an attempt to do is to prevent conversions, right, at the end of the day, of residential to office, because the conditional use review, or the use review criteria, you said have a presumption against allowing.
Yeah, it's partly for that. It's also just to assess impact, of an office use in a residential context.
And so, when it was purpose-built and planned out, that assessment was all kind of part of the initial planning process. And so I don't think this is an attempt to argue against that it's good to have people be able to work close to where they live, but this is more of an attempt to prevent an erosion of the residential into office space, which has happened on Spruce out east of Folsom. It's happened downtown.
Westboro, right.
So I think, if I may, to that point, then I would recommend crafting something that was specifically aimed at residential conversions. Because I agree that we should work towards preventing residential conversions, but there will be other new neighborhoods, or parcels or something like that get built that may want to incorporate a little bit of office in them, and I think that's positive. Maybe there's a cap of percentage, maybe it's no more than a 5% of the total space or something like that. But I do not support this in its current form. I think we've had a value of creating mixed-use neighborhoods in this town for decades, and I think it works out well for us. So maybe an alternate approach would be a total percent cap and not allowing conversions. If you took that kind of approach, I think it could work out.
So, Aaron, I'll just play a little planning speak here. This seems like it says modify the code to enable requests for use review for office and residential if capped at. So it seems to me like this would be a request almost for a conversion by its very nature. Now, if we want to say that it's a request for conversion, then that's fine. And so if it's a new build, then maybe it's not as big of a deal. But I also don't want somebody somehow to find a way to try and put 10,000 square feet of office into a residential zone, when if they can do that, they could be building residential. And so I guess, I don't know, maybe you can go back and think about this one a little more and focus it so that we're not losing opportunities for housing, however that would be. But that's my concern, is we don't want our residential land being used for office unless it's either planned like your situation or it's not taking away housing possibility.
And if I made that, I agree with that approach. So, I mean, if you were to look at it as a, tune it such that it was about preventing conversions and limiting the total percentage, as I said before, something like that.
Yeah, so maybe we end up with two caps. One is cap for new build, which would probably be a higher number, and then the second would be a cap on conversions, which is a lower number, right? If we want to discourage conversions, right?
Right.
What we want to allow, to some extent, and whether this is a thousands of square feet or whether this is a percentage as suggested, we don't necessarily want to eliminate those new builds up to a certain limit. This is all subject use review anyway, right?
Well, yeah, it is. And so I guess if we could leave it like this, not put the cap on and write the criteria for the use review such that it got at that, you know, those desires. So the criteria were,
L?
is this
I
reduced?
was just going to say that, make it an L.
What you just said, L with the L1 and L2.
L are for things, I think, that have few criteria. Is that essentially right?
Or you can
It's got the
add,
one-
I mean.
It's got the one criteria. I feel like this would have more than one criteria.
Well, L1 for conversions and L2 for new, yeah.
So what happens if, when we get done with the neighborhood, 15-minute neighborhoods or whatever, we could put office in, or small offices in those kind of centers, correct? And that's not addressed in
Yeah, I mean,
this.
we could go back to it, or we could just not make this change now. I mean, we could just go with option A and defer it until we have more discussions about 15-minute neighborhoods.
But we're talking about this because we're talking about the opportunity zone, and we have that in the opportunity zone.
So I say we send it to you, and you figure out the criteria for conversions and the criteria for new, and try it out on us.
Okay.
How about that?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean,
And you guys can give them ideas if you think of more.
so let me ask a question. Currently in RH zones, are offices an allowed use?
They're through use review.
So right now, in the opportunity zone, there's RH properties. And so somebody could propose replacing a small apartment building with a Class A office building, and then it would come to you. And what would you do with it? What criteria would you use to evaluate
Well,
that?
it'd be just the standard use review criteria.
And what are they for office and RH?
Well, it's just compatibility with the surroundings, consistency with the zoning. But those are the main criteria.
So would you say you would be more or less likely to reject a office building replacing a small apartment building in an RH zone?
I mean, it really depends on the context. It'd be hard to say.
So I think that's why there's concern, right? Is because I don't think we want it to be contextual. I think particularly in the opportunity zone, what I've heard a lot of council members say is we want to prevent the possibility of losing apartments to anything or losing condos to anything. So the reason this is of concern, Aaron, is not really on your end of the spectrum so much as, you know, what if staff, not these guys, but some other staff that come later, were to see an application and at a staff level make a decision. At least in both of these cases, it's a use review, which could be called up by planning board, correct? And then further by council. So the one bit of protection here for something like that is there's call-up possibility.
Well, these are actually automatic planning board, because if you do a non-residential in a residential zone, it has to go to planning board.
Okay.
So Sam, I mean, I totally agree with it. We don't want to encourage or allow something like that. So I think to Zan's point, if we say, yes, please do look at one set of criteria for conversions and one for new build, and the new build included something like no more than 5% or 3,000 square feet, you know, something like that, then we get at that.
That good? Okay. More office.
So this next one is related, and it grows out of, again, the concern about the jobs, housing imbalance. The previous suggestion, and kind of drawing from suggestions that came from council before, was restricting office uses in the business zones to no more than 25% of a building, and then as a method of trying to incentivize permanently affordable on the site, enable a building to go up to 50% office if they had permanently affordable units on the property. And if they did not meet that, they could go through a use review as an alternative. We wanted to bring this back to council since just we've heard some concerns in our housing staff that in most cases, you know, it's the developer is probably going to go through a use review either way. So maybe this would have to be something that has to be tightened. So we've revised the option to be like option C, which would be the same as option B, where cap buildings at 25% for office use and allow up to the 50% if affordable units are provided on the site. But in this case, it would be more strict in not allowing a use review. And that if you had an existing office in the BR zones, you could continue operation. If you're over 25%, you can continue operation. And you would be able to, if you wanted to expand, you could expand through the non-conforming use review process, which would enable a 10% expansion. But that new office buildings would just be capped at the 25% maximum for office, again, with that option of going up to 50% if there's a permanently affordable component. So we've revised it to option C.
Permanently affordable what?
Housing units.
Housing units, so it's mixed-use buildings, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would just like to raise the possibility of permanently affordable commercial space, because that might conceivably be more compatible. And so maybe it could be either affordable housing or permanently affordable commercial. I know that we're not quite there yet in the definition. So maybe we can't do it at this moment, or maybe you're willing to try and put it in and then, you know, put criteria that define that, because we've, at least at the 30 Pearl location, we have a definition and a test bed for that. So I think either one might be okay.
Okay. But still, housing is a higher use, right?
So, Carl, if I understand this correctly, you're saying that with this rule, then, that our business zones would not allow an office building of a building to have more than 25% office? So you couldn't build an office building in our business zones, is what the outcome of this would be?
I mean, we've had, you know, the discussion about the jobs, housing imbalance and how to best address that in an area where there could be a lot of potential for office, in a place where we're also trying to get more housing. So that's where this is coming from.
Can I ask a follow-up? I believe that this applies only to the BR, BMS, and BT zones. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So in like the downtown zones, office would be permitted, right? And so this is really looking at zone districts that are intended to be more regional or local neighborhood serving. And business transition, it's transitioning to a neighborhood. So, Aaron, I don't think it prevents office in all business zones.
Well, I guess the ones labeled business, but the downtown would be what would be left, I think. I think after you did this, probably the downtown would be the only place that you could build an office building.
Although we don't need any more downtown. Yeah.
So
Yeah, let's build more.
it says if affordable units, whether they be commercial or housing, are provided, but we don't say what percentage.
I mean, it would basically be a minimum of 2 affordable units, just depending on how many housing units that they put on the site. I think the wording as recommended by housing was like meeting half the on-site requirements on the property.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering how big the building could be and, how much office you will get. And then if they get a kind of a slide through, then you could end up with a lot of office and very little affordability if it was a giant building. I'm just,
Again, it can only go up to the 50%.
okay. But 50% of a 10,000, anyway, 100,000 square foot building is a lot of offices.
What about the replacement of existing buildings? In other words, I get the fact that some people don't want incremental office space, incremental jobs. That's a discussion for a different day. But if you had a building that had 50 offices, but had reached the end of its useful life, somebody wanted to come through and put the same building there with 50 offices, would that get caught up in this?
I mean, if they're doing a scrape and rebuild, it would be subject to this.
Okay.
They were generally keeping and refabbing, the existing building. They could go through a non-conforming use review if they were expanding.
So the impact of this over the long term will be that office buildings would degrade, right? In other words, if we said you can't touch your building, I mean, there's only so much rehab. I mean, consider the buildings we have down by the creek. We've made a determination that they've reached the end of their economic useful life, right? And we're tearing them down. Now they're in the floodplain, so we're not going to build something back up. But a commercial operator would presumably tear them down and replace them.
Or it might incentivize a conversion to residential.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to be clear on what the impact of that.
Okay, Aaron?
I mean, I guess I'll just speak to it. I mean, I would like to see us overall change our regulations to encourage more housing in our business zones. But I feel like preventing us from ever building another office building in our business zones goes too far.
So what would your proposal be? Would it allow you to replace existing?
I mean, that would be a reasonable addition to this. I mean, I guess I'm interested in hearing my council colleagues on this. But.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about to address the jobs housing imbalance is to rezone commercial. So this kind of gets at that. And so it's one way to accomplish more housing. So.
I mean, I guess so picking targeted areas and rezoning them, or like we've had this project we've talked about for years about taking the 28th and 30th Street areas and encouraging more residential in them, so you could do more residential. But this is kind of flat out outlawing office buildings. So
when you say outlawing, I work over in Flatirons Park. That's industrial general. There was an office building which was a relatively low rise, but office building in my general area, which is now, I don't know, 3 stories and totally redone and totally revamped and employs many more people, created a bunch of new jobs, which is good in one sense, and it creates a lot of housing demand in another sense, or in commuting demand. So, and that's IG, and so office is allowed in IG, I would take it?
Certain types of offices.
Certain types.
And I should have said in these business zones.
Okay, well, I guess the point I'm making with this is that I don't think we're outlawing office buildings. There's some new ones going in right around me as well, and someday my building will go away and there will be a new building there. But these are zones that are specifically intended as neighborhood serving or transition to neighborhoods. And so I think they're of a particular type where restricting the amount of office is something that we want to do. If it were, and they're, you know, if we look at the BR zone, there are offices there. There's a lot of them, and there's an intent to put more there. And that is not at all what the plan for the Boulder Valley Regional Center is about. And so, to me, this is a necessary step to get what we want. Otherwise, the whole thing may end up filled with offices because that's the most lucrative thing to build. And to me, that seems like a negative outcome for the community. You know, why even have the plan if we don't intend to take steps to enforce it when we're not getting what we want?
I mean, I'm not interested in having like a 1-on-7 argument with everybody. I'm just making a couple points. I just
I
think
might be on your side here, and so
Right.
it'll be 6-2.
Yeah. Yeah, the regional business zone is not neighborhood serving. It's for the entire city, and I think it should have a rich mix of uses. So to me, I think about, I don't know how you do this, but something of the total amount of office should be no more than this, or so we get plenty of housing. And lots of retail or something like that.
People feel on one-for-one replacement here. I mean, because that's the part that troubles me most is that I get the fact that people don't want more offices in these zones, but by imposing this, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to have fewer and fewer and fewer offices to the point where you're not going to have any. And maybe that's the goal. We should just be.
Well, no, we're not getting,
Because they're going to reach the end of their life, and then you can't replace them with another office.
well, you can only replace them with 50% of the offices, right?
Right.
But, so I don't know about 1-to-1, but,
Or something like that. In other words, allow some flexibility for replacement. And maybe it's just these numbers are too low. Maybe if we could talk about the 25 and the 50, maybe if the numbers are higher, then you effectively can get back to that replacement.
I think this gets back at balancing things out, so I think 50% is good.
Yeah. I'm fine with staff's recommendation, I think. And actually, if we lost some jobs, I think that would be okay. Because.
Oh, boy, that's tomorrow's headline.
Huh?
no.
Yeah.
Just wrote tomorrow's headline.
Yeah. But I mean, we are so out of balance. We need more housing and we need fewer jobs.
Okay, so I think for now, it's what it is. I think when it comes back, you have a little bit of time to get creative. Or we can play with the percentages, and maybe some folks out there may make some suggestions to that end. Okay? Can we leave it there for now? Points noted?
Okay, so last topic is related to preservation of existing market rate affordable units in the Opportunity Zone. So this is something that council raised as a concern, something that we've looked at in the use table, and honestly, we looked at it and couldn't think of a way to prevent the demolition of the units there. So based on that, we're recommending that the moratorium be continued during the duration of the Opportunity Zone for the RH4 and RM1 zones to prevent the demolition until, some other potential outcome could prevent that, but that's our suggestion tonight.
So Carl, but that wouldn't preclude rehabilitation of the units, right?
No, just full
demolition. So you could do something like what happened on 30th Street with the Nest.
Bob?
And I think, I just wonder if we should have a small unit exception here, because if somebody's got I get the fact that we don't want somebody tearing down 100 unit that's market rate affordable and replacing it with 100 units of not market rate affordable. We've just had that happen.
Or more
here.
Specifically, displacing all the people in those units.
Displacing all the people in those units. So I get the objective here. But if somebody had like a small, I don't know what a small is, 2, 4, 6, 10, something like that unit, that again, reaches the end of its economic life, wants to replace it. It's a small unit. It's not displacing a lot of people, but it just needs to be fixed up or rehabbed. I just wonder if there should be a threshold here.
But then you wouldn't be demoing it.
Well, you might.
To rehab it?
That's what we're about to do with the hospital buildings.
we're doing more than rehabbing.
That's my point, is that sometimes you have to demo to rehab. I mean, you can't rehab in place because it's not economic. I just wonder, I'm just throwing that out there as a proposition, is there small units?
Well, or maybe a way to get at it is whatever, if you're going to do something like that, you've got to rebuild to serve the same market sector, or whatever, so you take away the incentive to scrape because you don't get to build high end, you build to that same.
And it's fine unless you're one of the few people that's getting displaced.
I know, well, I get that.
I don't know, is there very many small units in there that we need to be thinking about?
We don't have the data on the unit sizes there.
We don't have the information. I just want to plant that as a seed for people to think about when it comes back. And maybe you guys can gather that, if there are small units there that we want to carve out to because you're talking about a long-term demolition moratorium, right?
It would be for as long as the opportunity zone is valid.
Which is like 10 years, right?
But should we put that in the code?
Yeah.
Well, there was a question.
I mean, I'm good with doing that. How else are we going to protect these things? And what Lisa was just saying, $10,000 for the...
Studios are at like 2,000, and then they go on up for 3-bedroom, 3-baths to 10,000.
Well, has everybody agreed that this is the outcome we want, is to preserve, and this is the best tool you can come up with? Or the only?
At the moment, if we're doing targeted changes to the use table, this is our suggestion.
Okay.
I mean, the one concern I have is that it not prevent rehab. So that we not trap buildings, as Bob's concerned about, in a way that they can't be redone. And so I guess what I would say is, if a case like that comes before planning and it's like there's a moratorium, there needs to be at least some kind of outlet so that they can appeal their particular case, because we have said that we would make exceptions and that it would be a council level kind of decision. So we just want to make sure that we don't trap somebody in bad conditions inadvertently. That's the one thing. But otherwise, if they can rehab, I think this might be the right solution, because there are a lot of units there. They're currently market rate affordable, truly like what just disappeared on Arapahoe. And so I'm really concerned with that particular area. So,
but the idea, again, that if you're going to rehab, that you're still serving the same market sector after, what, is that the right word? Market AMI?
Rents
Yes.
are the same or close to the same as what they were before.
Right, somehow you want to, if you're going to rehab. Aaron?
Yeah, I agree with that. And so just in talking about that rehab thing, right, that in our, we're updating the demolition code to look at types of demolition rather than percent of value, I think. So maybe if we took that approach, that it's, it's a rehab, not demolition, but a rehab type of project versus like no more than 10% of the building kind of thing, which could catch projects unnecessarily. And then just a question for you. So would this be written, I mean, the language in here is talking about the opportunity zone specifically. So would you write this specifically about the geographic area of the opportunity zone?
Yeah, I think if we were to move forward with this, and assuming the other changes could be supported in an ordinance, there would be an ordinance to lift the other zones out of the moratorium, but keeping these particular zones active with certain specifications.
Well, actually,
just if I could just interject, at some point, it's no longer a moratorium, it's a land use regulation. Yep. So I think that we could develop land use regulations that put certain types of restrictions on how things are preserved or demolished. We do it with historic preservation now. We could do it for other valid public purposes as well.
Well, in general, can I ask a question? In general, don't we want to prevent these kind of conversions from happening kind of everywhere? Is there a way to write something more broad that gets at frowning upon conversions in order to upgrade? Or is that not
We can take that into consideration. That's probably outside of the scope of this particular project because we're really trying to stick in the opportunity zone, but
Well, I'm just saying, whatever we fix here is
great.
probably
It's a
something
good
we're going to want to fix
suggestion.
everywhere.
So let me make a suggestion, since David said that this has really got to be handled separately anyway. When does the moratorium last till?
June 2020.
So by June 2020, why don't we just talk about a citywide adjustment like David talked about, right?
Get that scraping
So you just
to
don't lift these,
upgrade.
you just don't lift these out of the moratorium in between now and June 2020, or such other date is extended to. You do this citywide demolition land use adjustment, right?
Works for me.
Yeah.
But Cindy's waiting, trying to get in.
I just have a question about when we said we're going to leave it as it is on topic 6 before we wrap anything up here. Where was that? When we?
Oh, you're,
did
wait,
we-
okay, wait. We'll come back to that. Do you have
Okay,
anything on?
okay.
We're going to tie this one up.
All right.
The people, okay.
I just want to correct myself. It's not 10,000. It's only 8,300 a month.
See, it's a
83.
deal.
Yeah, it's a deal.
Fact
And
check.
there's studios, 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 2,500. So
Okay, does everybody like Bob's suggestion?
I do, I mean, I very much want to prevent the scraping of market rate affordable units. When you're talking about preventing all demolitions citywide, you need to be careful about unintended consequences. So, I mean, that's a bit of a bigger bite. So just, we'd want to have some a careful analysis that we were doing something like that, right?
So I guess I would just amend your suggestion is leave this in place for now, and by June 2020, figure out a creative approach to prevent scrapes of market rate affordable for conversions to high end.
Right. and then we
However that is done.
Yeah, and then we talked about making sure there's an outlet for renovations, maybe making an outlet or exception for small MDUs, but those are things we could talk about when this comes back to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think having that scope of work done, as Aaron says, that's a big, long, heavy lift prior to June 2020 is probably unlikely. So I would expect the new council to have to address that issue, either extend the moratorium or let it expire. And so I think the new council is going to have to figure this out.
Right, but if this is the last thing that's left in the moratorium, then maybe the extension of the moratorium becomes less controversial.
Sure.
If this is all that's left,
Sure.
and there's work going on, it just takes a few more months, then.
Yep.
Okay, going back to 6, how we left it was that most people were okay with it like is, but they're going to write it up as a proposed ordinance, and we'll hear from people if they have a better way, if they want to fiddle with the percentages or give us, lobby us on other ways of looking at this.
And when was that going to be by?
It's going to come back to us, it was on the CAC calendar in,
Yeah, we're looking at August and September.
right, so, yeah. So that gives time for people to think about it. That work? Okay,
Does this, just question of process, with the exception of the MH, is it MH, RH? RH and RM zones we talked about at point number 7, would this effectively lift everything else out of the moratorium?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but the one thing that we want to still talk about is whether there's any way to incentivize or in the opportunity zones, getting a higher percentage of affordable housing, right? To actually get something that we wanted out of opportunity zones. So just want to throw that out there. And have you guys thought about that?
Well, I mean, we integrated it into the suggestion for the business zones, and there's also the option on the ELU, but we didn't have any other suggestions as part of this.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's any way to incentivize.
How about the one that we just talked about the demolition? Again, if a building in RH4 or RM1 reaches the end of its life and the owner wants to demo it, I know they'd probably have an affordable housing requirement anyway, right? Isn't that true? They'd have to meet with our IH requirement for a new one, but maybe it's IH on steroids. In other words, it's a higher percentage. If they want to demo an existing market rate affordable building, they have to give us a heck of a lot of affordable units, more than just the normal 20 or 25% that IH requires.
Well, there's also Diagonal Plaza to think about, right? Because that could develop. How about an overlay zone? How about an overlay zone for the opportunity zone that takes into account the improved returns for office, commercial, and affordable, and we look at what we would need to do to incentivize it. And so whether that's an overlay zone that says, any commercial built here will have a higher linkage fee, and, any affordable housing built here will get moved to the front of the queue in, consideration by our housing department. I'm just trying to think out of the box here about, how do we incentivize housing over office space, a higher linkage fee locally that accounts for the additional returns that they would get and extracts that into our affordable housing fund at a higher rate. Maybe it's $60 a square foot, So, like the report recommended. But the point being that it's both a disincentive, but if somebody moves ahead with it, it brings funding in to affordable housing, and that would make housing more incentivized. And so is our amount of, if they're building market rate housing and we're still getting our 25% as a result of that, isn't that helpful that they're doing more housing than they're doing office space or other commercial buildings because we put a higher linkage fee? So that would be one suggestion or a thought. Is that possible, David?
I think that I would have to look into it further. I can think of a few concerns I would have about it.
I'm sure.
Well, okay, but how about looking at the other way? How about if we want Diagonal Plaza to get redeveloped with lots of housing, how do we incentivize that if it's in the opportunity zone?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, how do we actually go, hey, over here, do that over here?
Yeah, I think I'm channeling Yvette here a little bit in that I think what a lot of other communities do is they say very clearly, here is what we are looking for. If you are looking for an investment using opportunity zone funds, here are the things that we, the community, are looking for. So rather than try and achieve that through a regulatory tool, what I think we may want to explore is let's just be really clear in terms of here is what we are looking for. And especially if it's related to residential, maybe that's one of the things that we put into the remainder of the opportunity zone moratorium is if you're going to propose an affordable housing project, we might give you an exception for it. So in other words, we can try and kind of create that incentive through really what we're advocating for, whether it's Diagonal Plaza or whether it's somewhere else in the city. That might be the better way to do it. The window of investment, from what I remember, is actually very narrow. In other words, people are going to need to make their investment decisions in the next year or two in order to realize the true opportunity from the opportunity zones in terms of what that means for their capital gains. And so the time period that this is really going to matter is going to be pretty short, is my understanding. So that would be my suggestion, is let's do it more through a prospectus advertising sort of approach rather than a regulatory approach.
So, has anyone been tracking what the real estate, what's been happening with the real estate in the opportunity zone sales?
I haven't actively been doing that, but it's something we could look into.
It'd be interesting.
Weren't we going to track something in the OZ?
We are. We're tracking a handful of data points.
But not that.
I don't think real estate transactions was one of them, but I'll go back and look.
Thank you.
Well, I think it would be positive, and it would also blow everybody's mind if we put out a prospectus saying, hey, develop here. I'm just kidding. Redevelop here in the Diagonal Plaza. That might be a positive? I don't know. Is there any interest in council? Although, this is mostly a staff thing.
So how would that work? Chris, you want to talk a little bit more? I mean, we're not going to be co-investing except to the extent that the housing department would help support that and that LIHTC would help support it. So what are you thinking about? Because what if we say we want affordable housing in Diagonal Plaza and somebody says, that's great, I can make more money on Class A, and they build an office?
No, I think it's a fair point. And so I think that the choices that we have are try and create some sort of incentive or at least momentum behind that. The other option would be to create restrictions, land use regulations. It's part of what I think we're really trying to achieve through number 6 here, which is how do we make sure we don't get what we don't want, essentially? In the meantime, while this opportunity zone funding is on the table, and then after that, we've already said that we need to do a bunch of work in the Boulder Valley Regional Center around the BR zones. And so that work and refining how we would encourage mixed use in those areas is still a work item to come. We aren't going to solve it through this work today. So I think it's really thinking about if there are very specific things you want to get in this very short window of time, we could look at some regulations to try and achieve that. We just got to think of what the repercussions might be.
Okay, I'd rather go the prospectus route.
So to me, a prospectus route says, yay, we want this, yay, we want this, but then we have to give some incentives to get people to do so and to make it more favorable for them to do so. And so,
I like jump in the queue, your idea.
Okay. Yeah, jump in the queue is one. Another is accelerated approvals. Another is reduced review. There seem to be things that we could do, but they shouldn't jump, say, in front of other affordable housing.
Right.
So we have the flexibility, don't we, with the changes that we made on our inclusionary housing, where if somebody wants to build deed-restricted middle-income housing, as we define that, they can get credit for that, right? In other words, if somebody came through and rather than doing 20% plus 5, they could do more on the middle income side and get credit for that? So I guess I was getting to that too, I don't know if we have to make an affirmative waiver, or maybe it's already hardwired into the program. So maybe there's a bunch of middle income stuff there, and we waive any low income. I'm not suggesting that we would do that. I'm just saying that I'm trying to think of incentives where somebody may make more money on middle income than they do on low income. And as long as they're willing to deed restricted, we might be willing to waive some of the low income components of that. And maybe we can then throw in our middle income purchase program assistance as part of as a sweetener. We can come up with lots of ideas, I think.
Okay, so we're not going to solve this tonight, but is there interest in maybe, was staff going to do that anyhow, or are we telling staff to do something on the?
I think if.
You said you were channeling Yvette, so I'm curious, was she already planning on?
No, when I said that, I think I was thinking more from the perspective of Yvette's been tracking the evolution of the IRS regulations, and so that's really what I think I was focusing on. But
Yvette's listening tonight, just so you know. So
Hi,
she's hearing what you say. The prospectus idea is the way that most cities that have opportunity zones are approaching them. They are determining what it is that they want in the opportunity zone, and then they are creating a full color prospectus that they're sending out to the different investment opportunities. So this is the way that most are doing it, and the state of Colorado is encouraging it in this fashion.
Okay, well, so we got this the use table stuff to make sure we don't get what we don't want. I guess I'll just put on the table, especially just specific to Diagonal Plaza, because it's been on the kind of blighted, neglected, I don't want to say that too strongly, but it's been neglected for a long time, and it's, I think, on everybody's list as, hey, we could do some cool things here. So I'll just put it out there that I think that would be time well spent by people in the community or people on staff. I don't know if there's folks out there that are jumping at the gun on this. And I don't know what the process would be, but if there's anything good that's going to come out of the opportunity zone, we might as well try to get it where we want it.
Give it a nudge.
Give it a nudge. So I'll just, it looks like we're tired, but is everybody nodding? Okay. So staff, you can think about that. Okay. Anything else you need from us?
That's it.
I just lost my bet to Sam, but I provoked this conversation, so I think I get 5 minutes, which means I won the bet.
You had full control over whether you won the bet or not.
All right.
I do just want to say to staff, these were both excellent memos, and I really thought the way that you teed up the really complicated stuff in the use tables was very well done. So thank you for the time and the clear thinking.
Yeah.
Good job.
All right, we are adjourned.
All right, we'll call it a break. How's that sound?
Okay, fair enough.
Live from Paris en France 24.
More than